What up, y'all? On today's episode, we have my younger sister, Morgan Clark-Youngblood, for the second time. The first interview I recorded with Morgan was in 2017, early 2017, right before Morgan took off to help run a refugee camp for Syrian refugees in Greece. This current interview I recorded with Morgan at the very end of 2018, in December 2018, right before I was about to take off for a vagabond journey in Latin America. So the previous episodes of this podcast, almost all of them except for the first two, the first recorded with my mom and the first recorded with my younger sister Morgan, those two were recorded in early 2017. The remainder of the interviews were recorded during this vagabond podcast tour through the United States during the summer and fall of 2018. The plan from there, for me personally, was to get those interviews recorded and then keep my journey going down into Latin America whenever the weather got cold in the United States. So like late fall, winter of 2018, I planned on taking off to Latin America. And so I recorded this interview with Morgan right before the night before I hopped on a plane to fly down to Panama. And then there really was no plan from there. Just head south from Panama, which is what I did. And I made it ultimately to Bolivia before I headed back to the United States, to Washington, D.C. in summer 2019. During this interview, part of the interview, we were in the car going to the airport to pick up my buddy Sam Rio, who has been on previous episodes. Sam is my Latin American, Central American counterpart. So he flew into Atlanta the night we recorded this interview, and then we all spent the night at my mom's house, and then the following morning Sam and I took off for Panama. This interview with Morgan. Morgan is one of the most incredible people I've ever met. Obviously, I'm biased. She's my younger sister. I love her more than I love myself. But she is the shining star of our family. She is entirely self-sacrificing and constantly working for the greater good of humanity. I don't know anyone on the planet that more embodies self-sacrifice and altruism more than Morgan does. I mentioned briefly her work essentially running a Syrian refugee camp in Greece, and she's done a ton of other crazy, incredibly admirable shit in addition to that. And she talks about a lot of it, or I guess pretty much a lot of it. She gives an overview of her work during this episode. So I hope you enjoy very much. This is an awesome opportunity to listen to a very special person. So here's my sister, Morgan Clark-Youngblood. Morgan Clark-Youngblood.
Best guess yet.
Welcome to the pod.
Thank you.
So I'm just going to start with you as I start with everybody. Just start with your birth and just give us like a brief background chronologically of your life. And then I'll intervene with specific questions.
Okay.
So start with day one.
Well, oddly, I don't remember day one that well. And then also, as I've grown older, I have a hard time remembering childhood that well. Mm-hmm. So I guess I was the third child to a single mother, Robin Clark, who you've interviewed as well. Mm-hmm. I have an older sister, Katie, and Alex, my middle brother and my older brother. And apparently I was brought home and put in a drawer right away.
Is that true?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, brought to Toady, our grandmother's house, and then put in a drawer because there was no crib. And also because Mom was convinced by Toady to go to her house, which is a pattern that's carried on throughout our life. And then was raised in Atlanta, went to elementary school. But I can't think of anything. Had close friends, but a lot of elementary school, for some reason I don't remember. I didn't like going to school, and I think now reflecting back, had high anxiety going to school as well, which is a common pattern in our family. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if it's because of that I don't remember much. Mm-hmm. I remember always being a bit stressed out. Mm-hmm. And I think it has to do with our family situation. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure if Also, remember growing up, I think I'm naturally a bit more laid back and less dramatic than other people we've grown up with. And I remember thinking, like, maybe this isn't my family. because I would always think, even though I had my own personal anxiety, my anxieties are always very internal. Maybe I'm a bit self-centered. but the like drama of being of like outside things, or like even if mom's still like, is it recording?
You're good.
Even if like I remember like something bad happened, or like someone spilled something, like that freak out would always stress me out a lot. But I also can now empathize with being a single parent. So.
Right. So when you think back on your childhood, is the primary like emotion that resonates with you is one of like stress?
Yes. Really? Yeah.
Do you remember like it being a happy time at all? Are there any positive reflections on your childhood?
I mean, I remember having... that's the thing. I don't remember, like if I talk to Eva or some other childhood friend, that I feel like they have much clearer memories than I do. Okay. I can remember, like, a general arc. I remember, like, great memories of, like, the Pains I remember very clearly. Our next door neighbors. And they were a bit wild children. Probably should have been a bit more wild, too, as a child, but I wasn't. And I remember, like, them poking, like, having a lot of fun with all the kids on our street. Right. Which is great now, reflecting back. But, like, I don't have many other clear memories. Like, I remember them very clearly, like, poking holes in their parents' water beds. And then them peeing in the bathtub. And then I also remember them introducing South Park to us.
So wait, so your childhood is, like, punctuated. So it sounds like you have, like, a general, like you said, arc. Like this emotional narrative, generally speaking, about your childhood. Yeah. And then your memory is punctuated by specific events.
Apparently just by the Pains' misbehavior.
And then the fact that the street that we grew up on, there was like...
a lot of kids.
Tons. I mean, on our one street, which probably has 10 houses, it probably totaled like 20 kids. Yeah. Like there were constantly kids outside, which I remember specifically. But I have a more clear...
Yeah, but I also remember, like, one was, like, very shy as a child. Yeah. But also, so I didn't do a lot of, like, my own activities. But also remember, people always laugh now because I am considered to have, like, a very large personality and very extroverted. But, like, I remember, feeling overwhelmed by your guys' two personalities.
Me and Katie. Your older sister?
Yeah. Because you guys are... larger personalities. And then, like, I remember going, like, I feel like I followed people a lot. Like going to soccer games, going to pick up Katie.
I could see that. Yeah. I have a similar conception of you during our childhood, I guess, as well. It's like, yeah, me and Katie were these very kind of extroverted, eccentric personalities. Yeah. And you were the younger one, and we had a lot of activities, and you were kind of drug along.
Yeah, that's what so I don't really feel like, and this is like a pattern, though, that resonates with me, is like, I often try, like, okay, let's slow down and, like, reflect what's going on now. And so, like, I feel like maybe that was a pattern that I started early, like, just drag along, instead of, like, really thinking about, like, what you're doing now, you know?
At what point do you have like a delineation in terms of like these eras of your life? Like childhood seems like it's a little blurry.
I remember middle school well.
Is there like a delineation in your memory from like elementary school and then to middle school? Does it like start to change?
But like I've talked to other people who can't remember childhood and it's like marked by a trauma or something, and you forget it. But I don't really remember anything negative. Like, it's not like I think...
specific, like a negative event or
yeah. But then middle school, I remember it. And then I think high school was stressful because of diabetes and mom's illness. So that I also don't remember well either.
Well, that's something I had on my notes here. Like, my notes for the interview is that, like, maybe is like a checkpoint or kind of watershed moment perhaps where your memory shifted was when you were diagnosed with diabetes, which is when you were 12, right? 13?
13, yeah, going to 14.
Does that cause like a shift in your memory at all, your conception of
Well, I
childhood?
think I remember middle school well, and I think like I was on a normal adolescent path.
Uh-huh.
But I think it shifted me more into adulthood fast. So now reflecting back or like working a lot with adolescents, I'm like, oh, I wish I'd been more naughty or done more like adolescent things as an adolescent. But like, it's probably similar to you. A lot of adult responsibilities were put on my plate.
Because of diabetes?
Diabetes, and then later mom. But yeah, diabetes, because like I had a bit of health issues there, and then like something that like is different than other diseases, well maybe similar to OCD, is that like diabetes is something you think about every minute of the day. So it's like, I think I also was like determined, which is kind of funny. I was like, oh, I don't want this to mess me up, because like when you're diagnosed, there's all these question marks or like fear tactics, which a lot of bad things can happen. But I was like, oh, I'll take really good care of myself so none of these things, negative outcomes, happen. Right. So I think it became like too much of a focus. And as I moved into like adolescence, teenage years, and then adulthood, it's been like a balance of having to take care of myself, but like not that it's the center of my life.
Right.
Which has been like, in adulthood has really been a goal of mine.
And you feel like during your adolescence, like diabetes is kind of how you defined yourself? That was at the center of your identity?
I didn't want to define myself, but I think it like took up a lot of my time. And then I think also it's hard to connect. Even though I had like a lot of friends, it was hard to like actually connect like on their level, because I felt like I became an adult at that moment. And so
when you were diagnosed
with diabetes. And so I think I always felt like it was hard to like hanging out with high schoolers. I felt like I was I was a 25-year-old having to go to high school, and like how you would feel if you were put in as an adult in high school.
Right.
You know, maybe some people would like it, but
right.
I always felt like, what am I doing here?
Like you were more mature than your peers?
Yeah. And then also I had a lot more, like I felt like I got a lot of responsibility, and then also, I don't know.
Responsibility because of the illness?
Yeah. And I guess more mature than peers too. It just seems like, teenagers are, having worked with a lot now, it's incredibly like self-centered time. And I think, like I was like, okay, I see a bigger picture than this too, than like doing, maybe if I was raised in a city and not a suburb, it would have been different, but I felt like it was all very trivial here.
Really?
Yeah.
So even in high school, you recognize like this is kind of like this lifestyle or way of living is insignificant, and there's something more meaningful out there?
Yeah.
At what point did you start to like develop that concept? Is it once again to do with like the diabetes being the turning point there? It's
a good question. I've tried to reflect on it, because in interviews in the nonprofit world, you often have to like go very deep, or like they want to hear like your story, you know, or you're like, they want to hear a lot of passion. So I always try to reflect. I feel like from a young age, I've always been interested in like atrocities in the world, and like how that happened. Like I think in elementary school and maybe early middle school, I was like really obsessed with the Holocaust.
Yeah,
and then later like wars and stuff. So I was always like very curious about like inequalities, or like how negative things have happened, but also like by the human being, like how do we arrive at that point?
Right.
But I remember it's hard for me to distinguish like that interest, and then like also in diabetes, I felt like, okay, I really need to take advantage of life. And so like, I guess I wanted to it's hard to do that. Or I guess maybe some people would have done that by like drinking and using more drugs and as teenagers, but like I just felt very bored here, which is also a pattern in my life, feeling bored.
Wait, so you felt like, I just want to clarify.
Yeah.
So But you mentioned drinking, using drugs. It wasn't like you were a huge partier in high school.
Right. So I'm saying maybe some people who are like wanting to take advantage of life would have done it through that.
Oh.
But like I always focus more of like I'll take advantage, like make sure I do the best in school to get get open all the opportunities possible for me. So that's how I saw taking advantage of
I got you. So it was like diabetes was like this impetus to like, okay, I'm really going to hunker down now and like solidify my academics, create a clear path for my life, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and like, why did I think there was a lot of questioning, which maybe you felt too, like, why did I get this disease? Like, there must be, I'm not religious particularly at all, but like, why did this happen to me? And like, how can I turn it into a positive?
Right.
So, like, that's also when I became interested in health and, like, also realized that I was, like, very fortunate to have the access to healthcare I had and, like, the services I had and, like, the parent I had to, like, because when I would go to my endocrinologist, the diabetes doctor, there was only 2 pediatric doctors in Atlanta. And so we would see, like, all people, like, rural, or, like, we'd be in classes with moms like who couldn't give their children the medicine. Like, so I became interested through this disease and like all of these disparities, which is
so having that disease gave you this, because I want to connect some dots here, because you're touching on all these issues that I had written down that I wanted to touch on, and I'm going to try to connect the dots from there.
You can see how my mind works. There's a lot.
I think I know how it works already. It's crazy. It doesn't shock me that like you've kind of already touched on all of these points along my little interview map here.
Yeah.
Because, you're my full-blooded sister, so I feel like I'm kind of interviewing myself in a lot of ways. But I'm just going to try to connect the dots and then try to maintain the chronology here. Mm-hmm. So you're interested... So just to give the listener just kind of a broad overview and flash forward just a little bit, and we'll come back to the chronology of your adolescence and move up to where you are now. But like you work in the health sector.
Yeah.
And you've done a bunch of different stuff. Specifically now you're in school for a nurse practitioner. And
midwifery, yeah.
Nurse midwifery.
Yeah.
And prior to that, you already had, in 2014, you graduated with your...
12.
12?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I'm 2010, right? Yeah. 2012, you graduated from George Washington with your master's and undergrad in... Oh. I'm going to hit... Yeah, can you grab that phone real quick?
Yeah.
In 2012, you graduated with your master's and undergrad in public health, right? With an emphasis in maternal and child health?
Yes.
Okay. And so, was there any interest specifically in health? And I know it's kind of hard to say because you're only 13 when the diabetes got diagnosed, but it sounds like you think you matured at a young age. Was there like a specific health interest prior to that? Or was once you had to become hyper aware of your own physical health at 13, did that immediately like thrust you into this world of like, okay, I'm going to start solidifying an adult path for myself that is
No, I don't think there was ever health specific. Well, I think that interest started forming because I started seeing like, oh, my outcomes versus either peers or like people I went to school with or people I saw at my doctor's office, and then like also being in like in a pediatric hospital even for a few days is like quite shocking because you at 13 I was older than some of the younger kids. So I was kind of interested in that, but I was definitely, now reflecting back, always interested in people. So I was interested in service projects, always involved with my friend Eva in middle school, and I think I've always been very curious in people. Like, people are definitely something that fascinates me. Like, I think I'm a very curious person, but like if I could sit down and just ask people questions or like learn about their past, their history, how they arrived to X, Y, and Z, it really fascinates me. So, and like I've always been interested in history, which is really just talking about people and their decisions. So, always similar interests, but when I think I decided health more when I was applying to school, and I was thinking either pre-med or public health.
Right.
Which other people talk to me about. I didn't like grab it out of the air.
Right. But it seems to me like, well, I know there is now, but I'm wondering when this started, but it's not just an interest in people. There's also a very specific, like, altruistic element to it, to where, like, you want to work with people or with communities that are less fortunate than your own.
Yeah.
Has that always been the case? Like, at what point did you become aware of, like, this inequity of life that it seems like is kind of guiding your academic and professional decisions?
I don't know if it was introduced to us as like a responsibility when we were younger. Like, if you also think about it, we were raised by someone who works with people, who maybe would bring or like connect with families and you know, really, I guess as a child, painted our awareness of maybe people are in less fortunate situations, or like anything can happen to any of us and we hit like a bad bump in the road. But I remember like my favorite movie in third grade, and I didn't pick it out myself, we learned about it in class, was My Friend Martin, a cartoon about Martin Luther King.
About who?
Martin Luther King.
Oh, really? Called My Friend Martin?
Where some kids learn about Martin Luther King and get transported.
My Friend Martin.
Great movie, FYI. I remember making Mom go to Media Play and buy it.
Oh, really? I don't remember this at all.
Great movie. Would watch it. Yeah, so I guess I'm fortunate now thinking about that, because especially now I feel like, oh, maybe I've been like a little lost, but if I think about my life, I guess I've always had a strong interest and known what I wanted to, like, at least the broad strokes of what I wanted to do.
And what is that exactly?
Well, I thought before, like, I wanted to really be, well, I guess in still some case, like, be in leadership and, like, really enact policy or look at programs that can better people's lives. And I've always been interested in maternal and child health and like women's health, and I became really fascinated with violence against women because it's something that plagues like every aspect of society. But then as I've worked more in those fields, I realized that I actually wanted to work more directly with women. And I explored like social work, psychology, midwifery, being a doctor. But to me, it feels really empowering to have the skills and knowledge to be able to support someone when they're at their worst moment or most stressed time, or maybe in the case of midwifery, their happiest time. But really be able to give them the experience with respect and dignity that I think all people deserve. And it isn't the case even very much so in our own country, but really around the world. And it's also really cool to work with women because they're your own people. A lot of times you go into communities and being white from a middle class family from the US, you might not really feel like you're similar to those people, or you might have to work harder to find your connection. But I think women are very accepting people, and it feels really great to uplift our community, whether it's in my own actual community or somewhere else. So,
do you ever remember having any notion whatsoever that you weren't gonna work in some sort of like helping or altruistic capacity?
I liked econ in college, but I still saw econ as a way because you can use that in a development sense. But I don't think so. But I also always joke that I don't really think our mom gave us a choice. Like, some parents might be like, you only give me a lawyer, doctor, right, or what's something else that's important?
Doctor, lawyer, or engineer.
An engineer. There you go. But I always joke that like our mom was like, "Oh, you can only help people. Like if you get your business degree or like become a lawyer or engineer, like that's not helping." So
yeah, I have a similar recollection. And then not like a recollection, like a specific instance where like our mom set us down and was like, "You will work in a helping profession." But that was just kind of like the philosophy that underpinned our entire upbringing. Yeah. That like the single most important thing that you can do with your time on earth is to help those less fortunate than yourself, or just to help anyone, be them less fortunate or more fortunate than yourself.
Well, I always say, someone asked me one time, like, oh, why this? And I was like, well, I mean, not to sound conceited, but I think I'm a above average intelligent person. I think I have certain skills. I can definitely, like, I know one of my strengths is to connect with people. And so, like, maybe that could work really well in business. Who knows? But, like, why wouldn't I give the skills?
Yeah.
Like, to me, it always was, like, a no-brainer.
Right.
Like, why not? If I have the ability to do something, why wouldn't I do it?
Right.
And, like, I don't think you have to work 9 to 5 in a helping profession, but I think I have always felt the responsibility that if you're not working in a helping profession 9 to 5, outside your work, you should do something to make your community better. And community, like, it could be your neighborhood, your school, wherever you're involved. But, like, why not?
Yeah, that's a big crisis of conscience for me, I think, in recent years, because, obviously we're raised by the same person, the same household, alongside each other for our entire childhood. And I remember when it came, my whole thought process and I think maturation into adult occurred a lot later than yours. It certainly didn't occur at 13. I think it wasn't until college that I started to solidify or even started to conceive, I need to identify a path here in life, or a professional pursuit. And I remember in college thinking, okay, what is it that I'm going to either study or pursue after I graduate? And along the same lines, it didn't even seem like it was an option not to pursue something that wasn't a helping profession.
Yeah.
And I did that, starting in college. I studied international affairs for that reason, trying to kind of gain an awareness of the global inequities. And then I specifically, after college, began working in low-income schools as a teacher. Yeah. Specifically in special education. But I think after about 5 years of doing that, so maybe around like my late 20s, my mindset started to shift. And I think that was due to a variety of factors. But now I stand at this point as a 30-year-old man where I'm unsure of where to go from here, or like what the most, I don't know, what is the best route to pursue in life? Should I continue down kind of like a path of altruism and self-sacrifice? Or is, I'm starting, be it through different political philosophies or what have you, my mindset starting to shift, like perhaps the best way to contribute to a happier and healthier planet for everyone is to pursue your own happiness and health above all else. And perhaps constant self-sacrifice or altruistic endeavors like makes you kind of like eat you up. Maybe makes you a worse person. I'm still trying to strike, I think to strike that balance. It's
probably what you feel, because like if I reflect back on even starting in middle school, any of my time, like I don't like serving, but like working in a nonprofit or wherever I've gone, I don't see it. I know people look at it as self-sacrifice, but like it's what I've enjoyed doing the most. Like in a lot of ways, there's a lot. I always joke around that I could have worked in the U.S., but I couldn't travel then. Like right. Like there's a lot to fulfill. One, I love working with people. Two, my jobs every day, I've gotten to explore something. Like I've gotten to investigate something. Every day I would go to work and my mind would be open to something new. Right. So like that's so lucky. And I mean, I in my late 20s had that crisis where, because I mean, the nonprofit world is marked, or like the development world is marked by a lot of imperfections and definitely mistakes. And one, you either feel like a cog in the wheel, not really doing anything, or you don't see impact of anything, or you're questioning the whole time, like, should I be the one implementing this? Should I be here doing this? Right. Because it's probably not your own community. Right. And especially if you're working. Yeah. And then like you're usually not paid that much to abroad. I mean, sometimes you can. And so, yeah, I think I definitely, that's one reason I went back to school, because I was like, I at least want to have this necessary skills that like, this is something that's birth or women's health or whatever it may be, like, is something that's always been necessary and needed. And so at least I'll have like tangible skills to give to people. And I can either work in a very high income clinic or can work abroad in similar work I did before, or I can work in the US somewhere. So it opens up the doors, but it also selfishly allows me to work with people every day.
Right. I want to get into like your specific experiences because you've worked in a variety of capacities both during college and then after college, and you've got some cool stories and pretty incredible experiences. I think I want to get into those specifically, but just to kind of touch on what you're bringing up right now, you're back in school now because you want to solidify these skills and kind of have these skills in your back pocket, so you know, at least from a financial standpoint, like always have something to fall back on, or to like a skill to monetize?
It's not just money, but even in my previous jobs, I mean, hopefully I've helped or bettered each situation I've walked into. But like it's also hard going masters in public health, I don't know, international affairs are all very soft skills.
Right.
So general. I think especially like masters in public health, it's a helpful degree, but it's still very hard. You can feel very insecure because you might be like, what am I actually bringing to the table here?
Right.
So I wanted to be sure that I joined the team and I had knowledge that you had to go to school for that like is actually very hard to attain.
Right.
That, and like even now, on a daily basis, I love that I can figure out life a little bit more.
Right.
Like I understand what's going on, or like why you feel like this from a medicine, or
from a specific
yeah. And I also like in my life, I've had a lot of stress related to health, and it's those providers that have been able to like really hold my hand, calm me down, that have like shaped my life really, I can only hear because of them too.
Yeah, what you're saying kind of goes back to like this notion I've also been developing over the last several years, that like college seems really overrated.
Yeah.
Especially for a lot of areas of study. Like you said, what we studied, you public health, me international affairs. I feel like perhaps both of us didn't necessarily need to invest 4 years of our life and tens of thousands of dollars in order to get that specific knowledge. It seems like we could have just like been handed a bunch of books and gotten that knowledge. But perhaps what you're studying, I think there are still certain areas of study that absolutely need to be studied, like hands-on with the guidance of, experts in the field. And it seems like what you're studying now is more explicitly medicinal, and it seems like would be a better use of your time if you're going to invest that time and money in a specific university education. For sure.
And like my first degrees gave me endless connections too, which I mean, sadly is how the world works, or not sadly. And then that education also fit my personality at the time. I was really into like service learning. So it was a good I was lucky that for some part it was free. I invested tens of thousands to live, but it's also a bit sad that that's only really available, like those connections and like experiences. Because even though maybe I could have read a lot of it in books, I still was able to engage in discussion and meet tons of people who have done insane things and open my eyes to a much larger world because I was able to go to the school.
Right.
So, I mean, it's a bit difficult. I think a lot of times, especially with your master's, it's not necessary.
Right.
And I think I wouldn't criticize the education so much if it didn't cost $400,000.
Right. Fortunately for you had a scholarship for the most part.
Yeah, but it's because for me it was helpful, but I definitely learned.
Was $400,000 helpful?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that, or like even my education now, even though it's necessary to do the job, I don't think any U.S. school is worth that much money. Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't know.
It seems like a bubble in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
An constantly inflating bubble. Okay, so I want to flash back just a little bit and then kind of tie the pieces chronologically up through high school and then college and graduation. So we talked about how like both of us were kind of indoctrinated by our mother into this notion that this kind of altruistic path that we really didn't have. Not that she was like militant about or anything, but just because she, I think we both agree our mom's an awesome person.
Yeah.
And is constantly not in search, but constantly available to sacrifice herself for the betterment of others.
Yeah.
And so we were both kind of took that notion through childhood and into our earlier adulthood as we started formulating our vision for the rest of our adult lives. Have very much continued down that path, and I find it incredibly admirable. Me, like I said, I'm at this kind of crisis of conscience point where I kind of find it hard to look in the mirror sometimes. So I'm like, oh shit, I'm not like pursuing this altruistic path like I was supposed to, like my mom taught me to. But I do remember, and you've touched on this a minute ago, that like you always had this very specific interest in like these, like the horrors of human existence, or these major evidences of human inequity, like you said, the Holocaust and things like that. At what age do you remember that interest developing, and do you think that was a direct result of the same kind of philosophy and upbringing that we got from our mom?
I mean, it's hard to always separate nature and nurture.
Right.
And I have something I want to say about the self-sacrificing piece after, too. Maybe my friend Martin, which was third grade.
Really?
But I think probably earlier, like if you had taken me to a museum or something, I would have been like all about it. Like if you had taken me to a
But not all about dinosaurs, all about like the extermination of groups of people, a genocide essentially, right?
Yeah, or like any history museum. Like, I also remember I became very fascinated in first grade because we live in an area, since we're in the South, that has plantations. And I remember we had a field trip to one of the plantations in the area, and I became very fascinated by slavery too.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. So, but it's this constant awareness of like these horrors of human existence. Yeah, well, it's not as if you were interested in like the antebellum period and how like pretty the houses were, or like the Civil War and like the conflict between two sides, which I think war interests a lot of people.
Well,
but like you're specifically interested in the fact that a group of people are being oppressed. Seems like there's that
I think I'm fascinated by that, and I think this I can tie back to what I was going to say on service, which I know a lot of people, there's a lot of, in our PC culture, there's a lot of like argument if you should say service, but maybe supporting your community, that I think I was always fascinated with like, wait, how did that happen? Like, how did not the people being oppressed, but how did, and not even the oppressors, but how did everyone else, because most people it's a minority that's oppressed and oppressing. How did everyone else allow it to happen is what, like, right. I don't understand. I've always been fascinated by, like, the system of how it got to that point. Right. And I think that's, like, as you go and look for your career in altruism, I think, especially in America, having lived in many societies, sadly, there's a huge lack or thought about other people. Mm-hmm. And I think your greatest service to the world is every day thinking how you can interact or make your community a better place. And I'm not thinking like, oh, I'm going to give myself a service, I'll never make money, all these things. But like, there's small things you can do. Like, I try to always make myself available to someone if they need to talk about something, even if I don't want to do it, because like there's small actions we can take on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. And trust me, I get into bad moods, so maybe I like yell at someone on the street or or be an asshole to someone in like a store. But I think we should try to be a bit more conscious of how our actions impact other people. Right. And so like my interest has taken me maybe to like a much more purified, solidified route. But there's a lot of things people can do to make themselves, to give a little bit more back to their community. Like, I always try to think, and I think diabetes really solidified this, is like, what impact, big or small, do I want to leave on the world? Like, we're here, because sometimes I get way too meta, and I'm like, why the fuck is there life? Right. So to me, gives a bit more meaning to life if I can feel like I'm making my community a better place. Gotcha. Because many times I'm like, oh, there's not really a point to life. Like, I feel like a Sims character.
Right.
You know, like
Working,
I'm like
making
someone
money,
just
going to
made,
bed.
yeah.
Yeah, I feel you.
So like,
So in some ways, it's almost like I don't want to say selfish, but
well, that's
there
what
is
I'm
a
saying. Yeah, like, and also I have to be part of that community or this world. So like, or like I have nieces that and maybe children that will be part of this world.
Yeah.
So like, why not?
Yeah, I used to feel that way sometimes, in like especially my most grueling teaching jobs, or when I've worked with children who I thought were at the most risk or at the most some of the most difficult circumstances I've worked in. Like, obviously, it was incredibly difficult, and I would question sometimes, like, man, why am I like, this is a grind, this is brutal, why am I doing this? But there is this other side to it. It's like, wow, there is an incredible sense of fulfillment from this. It's almost like, in some ways, yes, it's a self-sacrificing profession, but I actually am getting something out of this. Well, like you said, it's giving meaning to my existence.
Yeah, well, and then also sometimes when I'm tired or I've gone back to school and it's a very intense program, sometimes I'm like, well, what else would I be doing?
Right.
Like, I mean, I'm not real. Sometimes I look for people who only go 9 to 5 and don't really have any other interest in life. I'm like, what the fuck are you doing?
Right.
I mean, if you think about it, what are you doing? Like, it's all made up. 9 to 5 is your job. That you have to work in office. That you need this car. That you need this job. Like, it's all made up. So
yeah, I mean, that's a big reason why I'm doing these interviews, is because I have gone down a similar path that you have in terms of like finding meaning to your existence by helping those less fortunate to yourself.
Yeah.
And then now, like I said, I feel like I've transitioned away from that in recent years. And so a huge influence of me doing these interviews is trying to learn from the people that I know best and that I love the most. Like, okay, what is the best way for me to live my life? What is the best way to find happiness and meaning to existence? Yeah. And obviously in your case, that's the path you take, like self-sacrifice and helping others provides meaning to your life. But I'm also trying to learn from I guess in our family, that seems to be the path. So, you know, going outside of our family to close friends and kind of picking their brain, and because a lot of my friends do work in this 9 to 5 professional arena that you're referring to, trying to pick their brains as well, in not a judgmental way, but just in a very objective, open way. Like, okay, like, how is it that you're living your life? You are waking up and going to a job that doesn't necessarily have any sort of greater impact outside of what you're doing in that office on a day-to-day basis. Like, is there a way to find meaning and happiness and contentment in that lifestyle as well? So that's definitely,
I mean, I think it's each your own path. For me, I think we've accepted like the status quo, like, oh, people are less fortunate because of X, Y, and Z. But usually when you examine, there are these systems in place. And I think it's kind of bullshit that like certain people act this way because they're these people, you know, or certain people, or certain countries have this healthcare system because they're in their location. Like, I think that's all. I think we can have higher expectations for ourselves. And I think a lot of times we're told it's impossible when it's just an excuse.
I want to dig into that a little more because I don't quite understand. Are you saying that like certain, so let's talk about a specific country. So like, are you saying there's certain countries or areas that we kind of operate under this understanding that they're like resigned to be at a lower status? Yeah,
well, I think a lot of times that's how development, maybe, hopefully not, it's moving out of that. But I think, or like, say you go to an inner city school and you're like, expect it to be total chaos. Like, why does it have to be total chaos? And the same way, I mean, usually and hopefully people in higher power realize that it's systems broken. But I think a lot of times we're reserved to be like, oh, that's how it is, you know?
Right. Do you think it's possible for an individual like yourself or anyone to provide a betterment to that system?
Well, I mean, maybe it doesn't take one individual, but if you don't have multiple individuals interested in changing it, then nothing will happen. And I think that's a huge issue. And I'm not saying that like I stand up for everything. Like, definitely climate change, I try to do some of my part, but like I'm not really trying that hard to work towards that. But I think it's easy to be like, well,
right.
And so for me, I see an issue. I happen to also be interested in it.
Right.
And so I've determined to hopefully make a change in the system, whether teeny or big. But I think a problem is, and this isn't like putting down the people who just work 9 to 5, because I would think, like, I've struggled a lot with anxiety and depression through my life, and a lot of questioning of what is it that we're here to do. So perhaps those 9 to 5 people who are questioning a lot less have a bit more a healthy balance in their life. But I think we can do a lot more to think about others outside of our little home.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of the debate that runs in my head recently, is like, okay, is it better for me to kind of feel unstable and perhaps overwhelmed psychologically, but I'm sacrificing myself on a daily basis for the betterment of a community or a specific group of individuals? Or is it better just to generalize, or is it better for me to just solidify my own well-being by perhaps working a 9 to 5 and therefore being a more stable and relaxed and calm and happy person? And in that way, I don't know, in some way maybe exuding some sort of positivity or happiness that's there for influencing other people later in that way as well.
I think it could be, but I mean, a lot of this has to just do with my personality as well. Like, I get bored really easily. I like stress. I like high intensity. And I like working with people. Like, and I'm really, I know that's one of my strengths. Right. And I know one of my strengths is organizing things when things are chaotic. Yeah. So, like, I think that's why I get a bit annoyed talking to most people about my work who are in the field, because I think there's a lot of, like, a Jesus, martyr mentality, when a lot of it has to do with my personal interest. I'm talking about from when I was 6 years old. I've had some sort of interest. So so it's not entirely self-sacrifice. No, like, you have a genuine interest. I don't really feel like I've done. Sometimes I think about, like, I've moved a lot. I've given up, like, I have very close friends, but being near close friends, like, romantic relationships. Sometimes I think that, but really, I have very few regrets in life, so it's not so self-sacrificing. Right. When was the first time, like, you actualized this impulse? Like, when was the first time you started working in this field? I know you mentioned even in, like, middle school with your friend Eva, you guys doing some sort of service projects. This has been a constant, I don't know, pattern is the right word. Like, this has been, now that I'm kind of reflecting on it, this isn't just this way of living for you and you working in this field or in these areas or on these initiatives isn't something that just came about even in college. Now that you're bringing it up and mentioning, like, the middle school thing, you've been doing this for a long time. And I can remember in high school, you working with, like, the special ed kids at school, or, like, the kids that were like severely physically handicapped or severely mentally handicapped. I can remember you doing that, and me kind of, walking around with my idiot friends and thinking, like, man, my sister's really, like, outshining me here. Well, I also had, like, an interest, like, also in, like, student council or other things. So it definitely has always been an interest. Maybe I'm the boring one. I haven't changed much. Maybe in terms of, like, lack of variety, but it's hard to say you're boring when you're doing, like, when you're you're helping in so many different capacities. But when was the first time you can remember it? Probably sometime, like, maybe through, like, the Baha'i community, like, with mom, or I don't know, but I definitely started in middle school. Just doing, like, volunteer projects and shit. Yeah, they had, like, the junior key club and stuff like that, so got involved in that. Well, Eva was a good influence. Also remember that we would go with, like, a little group of friends when we were, like, 6th or 7th grade to the senior center, like, retirement home, and we performed little winter concerts. Yeah. And, like, none of us, well, maybe Eva sings good, but everyone else, I'm not really sure who was involved, but I don't think we sang well, so. Old people don't care. So, I mean, I've also. But do you remember, like, gaining some sort of, like, there was an intrinsic value in that? Of course. Like, I think even people who have never volunteered, if you go and volunteer and there's people being like, thank you. Like, that's why some bad situations happen in the nonprofit world. You've seen it over and over again in history, because you can have people you're working with or teaching. Like, you get a bit of a God complex, or people need you. I mean,
right.
There's highly dependent people, you
right.
know? So, yeah. I mean, I hopefully I try to always remind myself, like, you're no one. And I, like, when I've been in charge of people, I remind them that as well, because I think it's an issue in the nonprofit world that there's a lot of ego fluffing. Like, you can get to know a lot of really important people and leaders. So I always try to bring myself down back to, like, any of these things could happen to me.
Right. Yeah.
Like, that's why I think it's important to remember is with interacting with anyone is, like, that could be any of us, and we all have value too. So that's one reason I wanted to gain skills too, because it brings you, for me, it really grounds and humbles me, like, being able to work every day with someone rather than, like, being in a nice New York City office or something.
Right, you worked in, like, some administrative positions prior, and now you're working more.
And I've always been exposed to, like, pretty high-level people. So, like, then you get to go, like, fancy dinners and, like, see cool speakers and stuff like that. So,
and now you're working on far more of an interpersonal level where you're working with actual patients face-to-face on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And you prefer that?
Yeah, I do. Well, but I mean, trust me, I have my cycles of what am I doing, because I also miss the leadership pieces, or like feeling important, or I mean, many times I am like wiping someone's butt, so like I enjoy it. But
damn, I could be sitting in like a.
But you have to remind, and I'm also treated like a 19-year-old, where it hurts sometimes to feel like I've thrown away like this important work. And I think when I first started the program, I was talking too much about like, oh, I used to do this and that, you know,
as a means of like justifying your current position.
Yeah, and like making sure people knew, which isn't necessary. But
yeah, I find myself doing that too. Like since I've been home the last few weeks, I've been just working at this comedy club because I've become interested in stand-up comedy. So I've just been working the door at this comedy club. And I find myself doing that too when like I'll interact with random people or whatever. I'll find myself like justifying like my existence with saying like, oh, like I'm a teacher. Like normally I'm a teacher. You know.
Yeah.
But I mean, if your genuine interest is working with these patients and my genuine interest is getting exposure to stand-up comedy or this field of art, then
who cares?
So be it.
Yeah, I know. I wish I hope to reach, hopefully one day soon, the like self-assuredness or confidence to like never really have to talk about those things.
Right.
Like if someone asks, talk about it, but like yeah.
I want to go back to like your maturation because this also we alluded to this earlier about like you kind of feeling like you were almost stuck in Katie, our older sister, and my shadow growing up. Yeah. Because like we were involved in all of these activities and you were kind of drug around to all of them, and you didn't play any sports, have any specific interests. I kind of remember thinking that too, like why doesn't Morgan play a sport, or like why doesn't Morgan have her particular interest? Like mine was sports and Katie's was dance and theater and all this shit. And I remember almost feeling like not worried, but like kind of unsure why you didn't have a specific like hobby or interest like that. Yeah. And then ironically enough, like you turned out to be the shining star of the three of us because like you said, your maturation process started occurring at a far younger age than either me or our older sister. And then I can remember, I'm 2 years older than you, but I can remember like my junior and senior year of high school, your freshman and sophomore year of high school, and seeing you starting to take on these leadership positions in high school and becoming involved in these volunteer projects. Starting to recognize like, oh shit, like Morgan's actually becoming like the leader of this family, and it seems like she's kind of on the best path here. So talk about that, how you it seems like you kind of skipped this adolescent period. It seems like you're kind of a child where you have this kind of hazy memory that's kind of punctuated by specific moments, but has this hue of anxiety over it during your childhood. Then you're diagnosed with diabetes. That kind of is the impetus for this hyper awareness of yourself and where your life is going, and then initiates this maturation process. And then it seemed like all of a sudden you got to high school, and before I knew it, you were still in high school and taking college classes. Like, talk about your high school experience, I guess, specifically, and This kind of transition
again,
from child to adult very quick.
Again, I don't know, like... I don't know. I wish I didn't have that personality trait sometimes, because I think it's good to do, like, I think it's a good experimental time and, like, a good social time to really do more risky behaviors, make mistakes. Yeah. But I don't think I have very high expectations for myself. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if I really ever allowed myself to make those mistakes. And it's still, like, I hate learning languages because I don't want to, like, I know it, part of it's because I don't want to look like a fool in front, which is a bit silly because I don't really think I'm someone who takes myself too seriously, but maybe I do. But I wonder, I don't know. This is a good therapy session, but probably should be explored deeper. But, like, I always had, and this is still an issue of mine to this day, like, I feel like I need to, like, swallow the world, like, do everything. So, like, that's my focus. It's not...
Your focus is doing everything?
It's, like, doing a lot of things.
As much as you can.
As much as I can. And also achieving these very high expectations for myself. Right. And they've always been, like, more... Because I guess my interests have always been a bit more academic focused. And, like, knowledge focused. And I know that's because I'm a really curious person. So, I always love research. And I like working with people. One of the reasons, because, like, doing a mini research project with each person. Right. But, so I was fulfilling... Looking back, I was fulfilling my interest and hobby. But maybe during that time, and maybe, like, that's a bit autistic of me, like, other people didn't really fit in on those goals. Right. Like, I like to have fun sometimes, but also didn't really, besides a few handful of people, and I had lots of friends in school, but, like, really to spend my outside time from school, I didn't really see so many people that would really make, like, grow myself and, like, advance me. All my friends still to this day are people I feel like I learn from every day, or make me or challenge me in some way. So I was like I remember in 9th grade or something talking to someone who was one of my best friends, and we're talking about, like, makeup and, like, a type of comparing two different types of very expensive jeans. And it's funny because now I really love clothes, but, like, I was like, why the hell are we talking? Right. Like, I like clothes and I go and do it and buy it, but I don't need to talk to anyone. I can't imagine talking to anyone about it. Like, it all seems very superficial. Right. But this area is very where we grew up is very superficial.
Can be, yeah. Yeah, it totally can be.
I mean, I don't find, like, I've even found maybe the Emory-Decatur area is a bit less superficial, but, and this might sound a bit, like, stuck up, but I find the whole city a bit superficial.
Yeah, I also think you're coming from it from your perspective. Like, everything's going to seem superficial to someone with your experience, to someone who's, like, spent a majority of, or a significant portion of their adult life working in the developing world, working in dangerous areas and refugee camps and
I wish sometimes, because sometimes I realized moving back here, I was like, oh God, I am afraid I am stuck up, because I think of myself as being able to talk to anyone, and then coming here and I have nothing to connect with people on. So I get a bit worried, because I'm like, well, no, I don't expect everyone to do what I'm doing. Like, that's not my expectation for anyone or want for anyone. But then I have nothing to talk about with people who aren't interested in it.
This is an interesting transition. So because I want us to talk specifically about DC. So you ended up going to school, undergrad, and / your master's. Well, let's flashback a little bit. So you go to high school and you start taking college classes in high school, correct? So by the time you graduated high school, weren't you like a sophomore in
sophomore thing? Yeah, I think I went in with 2 years, Okay. Was that part of that? And I guess that contributes to the notion you were talking about earlier, like, you were surrounded by
people and peers that you didn't quite resonate with, and was that just kind of an effort to begin the transition of this world that you didn't really feel connected to?
Yeah, I always felt like, I'm ready to go. Like, I felt...
I'm ready to do something more meaningful?
Which maybe it was also a bit of a peek into my past. I now am working to not freak out after... I get bored very easily in a place, too. And so I don't know if I was just... also developing my more adult behaviors or adult personality when I was like, all right, ready for a new challenge, ready for something new. Because
after 2 years of high school, like, I'm ready to start college.
I know, yeah. But then sometimes I look back sad because I'm like, oh, dang, I should have gone slower. Like, I try to always tell that to people who maybe, like, call me for, like, professional advice, like younger people. I'm like, don't worry, you have time. Take a step at a time. Take a deep breath. Yeah. But again, I don't know if it's because they're... from my diabetes, if the anxiety I ingested was like, oh, you're gonna die. So then I don't know if that's also... it's hard for me to separate just my personality versus like a bit of fear or anxiety. Right. Because
the diabetes definitely gave you this like awareness of your own mortality.
Yeah, like I always had a thought like, oh, well, maybe I won't make it that far. Right. So I was like, I better enjoy it while it's at. But Oprah probably had... a big thing to do.
But I think we kind of touched on this, but it's not as if you like became hyper aware of your mortality at age 13. You're like, oh, I need to have as much fun as possible. You became hyper aware of your mortality, and it seemed like that was the impetus to be like, man, I need to do as much meaningful shit as possible.
Yeah, maybe again it's an insecurity. Like, I need people to be impressed.
Is that true, what I just said?
Yeah, it is true. Okay. Yeah.
And would that maybe would even contribute to this note of like you beginning college classes as a sophomore or junior in high school, whenever it was, like, was there some sort of like thought in your mind that like, oh, I need to get this done as soon as possible, I need to get like my college studies done as soon as possible because time is finite?
I don't know if I would have thought about it, except our mom also was like, oh, they have this option. I'm not really sure who... And then when the option was presented, I was like, oh, that's a good idea. I think I always have this sense of, like, being very competitive with myself. So, like, pushing myself to do something more difficult. I don't think that I was probably done. Like, there wasn't much more to explore at Centennial High School.
Right, you weren't finding any sort of major connection or meaning.
No, and I feel like I was...
high school student in suburban Atlanta.
Yeah. And there wasn't, like, if I had been connected to, like, theater or something, but, like, I was connected to a few clubs, but, yeah, so there wasn't, like, another challenge there.
Did you find greater connection, so you graduated, you know, did 2 years of college while you're still in high school, and then you ended up in Washington, D.C. at George Washington University studying public health, as we mentioned earlier. Did you start to develop a greater sense of connection to your environment when you were in DC / in school?
Yeah, one, because I love DC. Like, I love being in a city. And still, like, I would much prefer to be in a busy city. But it's funny because, I mean, I've lived in not big towns in other countries, and I don't have any of the same issues I do with Atlanta, but then you have a lot to explore. But I like DC because it's a really fun city. There's a lot to do. There's a lot of power there, so like that interest in power and like how that all works. And then my school luckily was like the perfect fit. They now being at Emory, I realized, oh, Emory really pushes your grade point average. I don't remember that all at GW, but they push your like involvement, service learning. Like they pushed us from day one to work in the city, not like at the deli and campus, but like on Capitol Hill or at the State Department, at WHO, those kinds of things. So there was a lot to do, and like also lacked a lot of the skills to do those things. So like, and everyone there was, GW definitely picked a certain profile. Like it wasn't just based on your grades or like SAT score. They picked a certain kind of person. So I met a lot of little Morgans there. And then I also met a lot of very liberal people, which I found interesting, and people that were just as interested in like politics or I don't like.
And you didn't have that kind of exposure connection here.
No, just
Atlanta.
3 people I can think of really.
Right.
Yeah.
So, kind of the meat of the interview I want to get into is like just your varied experiences, because I think we've shared some of these kind of more adventurous and wild experiences, but you've had more than I have, and I think that begins with your time in Honduras when you're in GW. But I think like you taking these, I guess, major risks or getting involved when I think in like our really admirable initiatives began in like earnest when you were in school.
Yeah.
When was the first time like you got hooked on that kind of path? Was it? I remember you did an alternative break trips to New Orleans.
Yeah, I think
talk about that.
So GW really pushed their Office of Community Service was front and center. So before even starting school, I did an immersion experience in DC where they like really connected you to the social turmoil and issues in DC and like structural issues. And then through that, I got connected through the Office of Community Service and went on alternative breaks. And even I think at the time it was like 4 or 5 years after Hurricane Katrina. Like it was insane to go into some parts of New Orleans. And I think being able to go there and really have that experience and awareness that most people couldn't get, like really fulfilled me. Yeah. So, and then from there, from Hurricane Katrina, from New Orleans, I got connected to a friend who wanted to lead a trip to Honduras. And she's the one who actually found, I don't even know, I think maybe someone from the organization we worked with in Honduras came to GW and like proposed, or she found it.
Regardless, you ended up in Honduras.
So we were planning our winter break trip there for like 15 college students. And so me and my co-leader and a bunch of friends went over summer break there to the organization and like did a typical like volunteer project, like some construction. I think we built like a radio booth or something. But that really opened me up to, I was really amazed by the rocking of the status quo there. The leaders of the organization, it was a youth organization, youth empowerment organization, really knew that these youth who, like in Honduras, every youth is really looked at like a delinquent, had greater potential and had the leadership ability. I was like blown away that these like 15-year-olds were making huge impacts and implementing leadership projects in their own community with all odds set against them. And I think that really opened my eye to like, oh, wow, you can really do a lot and you don't have to wait till you're 45 or 50 to do something. And at the time it's probably 18 or 19. Like these things can start now. Because I think I went into school interested in obesity and nutrition, and then slowly I got interested more in sexual health and like violence, things like that. But
so you did that initial like alternative break project, which was over winter break, right?
It got canceled because the Honduran coup happened. But we went over the summer, and then we had to plan another trip because the school wouldn't let us go to Honduras.
Because they just had a coup d'etat.
Yeah, but Sam and I, a friend who went down there, stayed connected with the organization, and they were interested in us coming down as interns. So I planned with them to go back over my sophomore summer break.
The summer break after your sophomore year?
Yeah.
Okay. And you did?
Yeah, and I did. Yeah.
So you went down initially just for...
like a scoping out trip, make connection.
When was that?
Freshman year, summer break.
Okay.
Yeah, and then it got canceled.
But did you ever make it down there?
We went down because we went on our own accord, and then the school wouldn't let us go under GW's funds.
Oh, but you went anyway.
No, so that was in the winter. Sorry, we went down in the summer to plan the next winter trip.
Oh, okay. So you went on your own accord in the summer to plan the winter trip. The winter trip got canceled.
Yeah.
But then the following summer, you went down as interns.
Yeah.
Okay. And talk about that, because that's kind of, I remember that summer. So this is the summer after your sophomore year. It's the summer 2010. Yeah. I just graduated college.
No, this was summer 2010, but that was right before you didn't come down that summer.
No. But I remember I had just graduated. I had started teaching out in Phoenix. I didn't study education. I was in like my little teacher 6-week boot camp to learn how to become a teacher in Phoenix. And I remember you were doing your own kind of crazy adventure in Honduras. And I remember Mom calling me and telling me that like you had been working for the summer and that ultimately you all decided to stay.
So I mean, I think Sam had always, because he didn't do a traditional, he's a year older, he didn't do a traditional study abroad. He had always planned to stay till December. I didn't really know Sam. He was a boyfriend, and then at the time ex-boyfriend of the girl I did know. But we ended up getting along really well, like it became part of the family right away. Also, a nice thing that happened in college, although I always like to say, like, I guess I'm like a responsible, like, I feel like I definitely am a bit crazy, and like you can convince me to do many things, but there's still a big edge of responsibility. So I guess I got to explore that side a bit more, especially like in a city, like in Honduras, you can get into adventure very easily. So I think we were doing that more, and Sam is just a very fun guy too, and very carefree, which I'm not so carefree. So it was like a good balance between the two. And then the projects we were doing in our team was super awesome. So the director, who became a very good friend, offered me to do basically not an evaluation because that's too like formal, but like an interviews and impact, like a needs assessment with all the families involved in this organization who benefited from the organization. So I called Mom, and I was just, and also because I went in with 2 years experience of credit. I mean, I should have graduated in just with my bachelor's, I guess, in 2010.
After 2 years of being in school, you should have had a
so I was like,
degree. I'm already ahead of the game.
Yeah, why not take off? And I wasn't going to study abroad because those things cost a lot of money. So I was like, why not? And you
decided to take off a semester.
Yeah, I took off a semester, but I'm sure it wasn't the nicest call to get.
What, you mean from Mom's perspective?
Yeah, because I was like, I'm just not dropping out of school, but taking a break out of school.
Right, yeah. So you'd gone down there to just intern for the summer. Things went well. The organization asked you to stay for, this is about fall 2010, and so you decided to take the semester off and stay down there. And what, you're like 19 at the time?
19. Dang, looking back, I'm like, wow, that was a really good decision making.
It was great. I remember thinking like, man, this is kind of a big deal, but like I also thought it was super cool.
But you're also like in college now, as like a real adult, kind of real adult. In college, you have like a lot of security because it's not like I was taking a break from like a job and then I had to figure out a next job. Like it was quite secure move still. Like I had a fully paid college.
Right.
You know, I mean, it wasn't secure because Honduras is insecure, but like it's not. I think. Now I have a lot harder time making decisions because I feel like there's a lot more at risk, and it's not so clear cut the path. You have to make your own path. Yeah,
stakes are higher when you're an adult and when you're in college. Like, I think that's a great point. The path. Like, you know exactly what you're coming back to. I'm coming back to my university studies, right?
Yeah, I had to I don't have to find my own room, like apartment even. You know, it's right there.
Right.
And like also I also was learning so much. Like now it's harder for me to find something that's new. Right. Even at Emory working with global health, I still have to work a bit harder to be like, I've done this project before. And my master's, like it's a bit harder to find something that's new and fresh and challenging. So
yeah, but at the same time, just to provide some context, like it's not like you were taking the semester off to go work at like a turtle farm in New Zealand. Yeah, you were working at with what was called the Organization for Youth Empowerment, OYE. Yeah. In donate. Honduras. What's that?
I said donate.
Yeah, donate. Right. OYE Honduras. You can Google it. But yeah, Honduras at the time had just gone through a military coup. Yeah. Right. And during this period of time, and maybe, I don't know what the exact figures are today, but there was Honduras is one of the most violent, even still today, is one of the most violent places on earth.
Yeah.
During this time, the 2010 through probably 2015, and maybe even still today. Like I said, I don't know the exact numbers, but Honduras had the highest murder rate of any country on the planet. And so you're a 19-year-old. Yeah, Venezuela now is probably.
Yeah, I think it's
taking the crown. Yeah. But you're a 19-year-old girl at the time.
Yeah.
In school who's, kind of digging up her life and replanting yourself in Honduras, at least for, several months, to work with this organization that is providing scholarships to some of the poorest students in Honduras, high school and university students, and then also providing after school programs to them to keep them off the streets and out of gangs. So providing scholarships to keep them in school so they don't drop out and join the gangs, which are very prevalent in Honduras. And then also providing after school activities and what are those quote unquote capacity building programs. So things like a radio station, which you mentioned, a magazine, sports programs, art programs, and then on top of that also workshops, like sex ed workshops and resume building workshops. And sorry, I'm going into the specifics of it. Ultimately, we'll get to in a second, but I ended up working with this organization as well. But you uprooted your life in order to do this as a 19-year-old. Talk about exactly what you did. I think you alluded to it earlier, what you were doing during that time, and then where that led you after that. Yeah. Because you end up back in Honduras a little later.
Yeah. So I was interviewing, or I've been offered, because in public health you do build some skills with statistics and how to conduct an investigation and build interview tools or survey tools. And so I worked with a good Honduran friend who was an employee of the organization. We worked together to build this survey of family needs, and then also how Oye has addressed some of those needs, or maybe could address those needs. And so with the town we were working in, the center feels super small, a teeny town, but the actual municipality is 200,000 people. So we would go everywhere, up mountain. I mean, also Honduras had no paved roads. So, I was spending my day, instead of sitting in a classroom, going up these paved roads, probably getting unpaved roads, getting a baleada, sitting with these families, building my Spanish skills, because they also weren't the best at the time. That's what I think is the craziest thing. I didn't even think about, I don't really speak Spanish.
Yeah, you don't really speak Spanish that well at this time.
I did after, but, I'm not really sure. Again, I am fortunate that I can connect with I like to connect with humans, and you don't really need language that well. And so I also got to sit there and talk to families day in and day out, and really expand my understanding of what a lot of people in this world, and even in our own country, I'm sure we can go to some very close areas, go through. So it was fascinating, because they're kind of unfathomable things. But then it also, this sounds a bit cheesy, but quite inspiring, because I'm whoa, a lot of these kids are doing, or people my age were doing, more impressive things, and this is the background they came from.
Right.
So I always feel in my work, because when I lived in Honduras too, before the coup, it was dangerous, but not as dangerous as it got later, when we left in 2015. But I would say probably month by month, it felt more and more dangerous.
Right.
The seams of the country were unraveling.
Right. You think it was more dangerous when we ultimately left?
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Before that summer, it wasn't so dangerous.
That first summer you were down there, or
you definitely had to be
smart. You were down there. Did you see any crazy shit or things popping off like you did later on?
Maybe I've more heard of things, because I was talking to these families who live in the worst areas. I would hear, I always loved it. Hondurans are super laid back people, but I always hear one of our questions would be oh, do you consider your neighborhood safe? And they would always say yes. And then when we get into the conversation, they talk about how, like, the police have never been there, that their 4 neighbors were just, like, massacred and cut up. And, you know, they can't go outside ever because the gang member across the street, like, controls everything. But like...
What they consider their neighborhood safe.
Yeah.
They don't know anything else.
I guess. I don't know. I don't know if it's
What's the definition of safe? It's kind of subjective.
Yeah, exactly. Probably a bad interview question.
Right.
Looking back.
So during that time you were doing these, you're traveling essentially from house to house. Some of them were urban, some of them were super rural, like you said.
Yeah, mostly rural, yeah.
And you were there for, what, like a total of 6 months during that stint?
No, I was there from May to January. What's that?
6
No.
months.
8 months. 7 months.
7 months.
8 months. Okay, whatever.
6 to 8 months, whatever. So then you go back to school your sophomore year. You started in this spring semester. Mm-hmm. Now 2011.
Yeah. Came back with hepatitis.
I remember that. Hepatitis A. Let's be clear.
Yeah, let's be clear.
That was wild. And then, but Sam, the guy that you were working with at the time, who was ultimately my roommate in Honduras, who was actually flying in to Atlanta tonight, or in the air right now. What time is it?
8:38. Yeah, we got
to head out of here in about 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Y'all, when you get back to DC, back to GW, you guys start working on.
Oh yeah, I think
your own initiative.
I think when we were leaving. Oh, so also when we were there, our the alternative break trip I originally planned a year and a half before got approved. So that my own peers from GW came down. So like at Oye, we would host several alternative break trips from a Canadian university. So they came down, and of course I knew some of the people, and I think like Luis was putting in, because those alternative break trips, we would really focus on like a more educational. A lot of times when you go abroad and like volunteer for a week, I hate to break it to you, but most of the things you're doing aren't actually that meaningful. Like they're doing it more, I think, for your own satisfaction. Right. And so we would maybe do something that was kind of meaningful, like paint a mural at a school, but it always had like an educational point of view, and it did make the school look better. But it was largely focused on like, why is Honduras in the situation it is right now? And so Luis, who was like a very big like philosophy, sociology person.
Luis was kind of like
the director. He was the director.
The director of Oye at the time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so he kind of, he had the idea, and like we bounced it off with us, and we began planning of like making like short study abroad kind of, but more meaningful for college students who could get hands-on NGO experience, but also a greater education, like a more equitable education of like, these are our Honduran leaders, this is how they're making their community better, but also this is how a country ends up in this situation. Right. And like why these inequities exist. Right. So we began planning that.
So essentially you began the planning stages of creating an organization. Yeah. A nonprofit. Yeah. That would act as like a provider of these short, I guess the best way to describe it would be study abroad opportunities for university students. Mm-hmm. Because that's what we had the connection. American university students to come down and essentially study the role that different actors or nonprofit organizations are playing in Honduran society.
Yeah. So kind of like an educational point. Right. From them. Yeah.
But this didn't exist. This is something that you guys, this is just kind of like a brainchild that you, Sam, and Luis kind of came up with.
And we could implement it.
Right. Yeah. And ultimately, that's what you did.
Yeah. So we started planning it. I mean, now looking back, I wish I had done it a bit differently, but I mean, we were 20 at the time, so I guess who cares? But yeah, so it definitely could have gone a bit smoother, but hopefully people learn stuff. Yeah, and I mean, the people who came, I think the people, if you're going to go on a trip like that, were pretty laid back and quite flexible. So
summer 2011, after now your junior year, you end up back in Honduras.
Yeah, we got your help.
Yeah, you've now started this nonprofit organization with Sam, your friend from GW, who's flying in right now, and Luis, the director of OIA, the organization I worked with prior. So now you're 20 years old, back in Honduras for the summer, running this nonprofit.
Yeah.
And it was right around that time I had just finished my first year teaching in Arizona. And I remember you guys called me up and asked me, like, hey, could you come down and help us with this? Yeah. And so I ended up down there with you and Sam and Luis helping run this.
Super fun.
This nonprofit. It was pretty crazy. It was fun. I it definitely was a watershed moment in my life. Like, it was my first exposure. That's not true. I guess the year I'd done like some nonprofit volunteer work in college in Costa Rica. But this is like, as an adult, like my first real exposure to this, to working in the developing world, like super hands-on. Yeah. Yeah. So how do you reflect on that summer?
Well, I think it's funny because I'm like, oh, wait, maybe I should talk about this more. It's funny because also working in nonprofit worlds, I'm like, well, you can really twist the story however you want because I don't really talk about it that much. But I definitely learned a lot about like my trust in other people and maybe to question things a bit more because the implementation did not go the best. I think also I maybe learned like, oh, you do need, that's when my education was helpful because if you had done a study abroad, you would have had someone more senior overseeing your decisions and advising you. Right. Because I think we definitely should have had an advisor. Totally. Like now, definitely having implemented projects and a full adult, I was like, well, I should have done things way differently.
Yeah, I mean, it was two 20-year-old people, you and Sam running it with the help of Luis, who was young himself, and then me kind of
in a totally like different country,
I guess my role is kind of like utility man. Like
I think we still provided like a much better experience, and I think than even
definitely authentic.
Yeah. Oops. Yeah, but I mean, then what you'll get from other bigger organizations who do similar trips. So I'm proud of that. But I definitely learned a lot that like, and I've learned this many times in my life, like, oh, you still need someone overseeing you. I think maybe even from since I was 13, controlling, I like always want to be in charge. But again, there's no need to rush I think it was a teaching moment. I'm not sure if I learned that much then, but like, oh, maybe go a little slower. You're not ready to do this. Right. Like it's also a strength to be like, this is too much for me. But it was awesome personally being there with you, Sam, a few other people. Like, definitely one of those moments like I cherish and will definitely always think about and feel very fortunate to have done personally, at least. It's super cool. And it was cool to be able to continue that experience in Honduras. Yeah. But it was cool to be able to share it with the two of you.
Yeah, it was crazy. And we end up back there, so... you get this, so you go back to school, you complete, that was your senior year, I guess, when you went back, right?
My senior, but my education gets all muddled because I start my master's with that.
At the same time you're doing undergrad.
So I went back to Honduras to do my thesis work for my master's one more summer.
But that's before you went down there permanently? Or for an extended period of time?
But I worked with a large international nonprofit, made my connections, then I went down there. But I went down, so my schooling was so rapid and fast, I didn't really have time to make life plans, which again is a pattern in my life. Right. And so I decided when I took a few weeks or a month off after school, like, do I want to move to New York? Do I want to go abroad? Do I want to stay in DC? Making all these decisions. And so Sam had moved back to Honduras, so I was like, well, it's not that expensive to go to Honduras. So I flew down with like savings, and I basically presented at the door, hopefully I emailed, at this large international nonprofit and was like, can I do any work for you guys? And they offered me at first like an internship position that later turned into a permanent position because they got a grant for a new project. Right. So...
This is not your thesis work?
No, but I worked with the same organization, so they had liked me a lot during my thesis.
So you've got the trip down when you interned / took a semester off. Yeah. Then you've got the following summer when you started your own organization.
Yeah.
In Honduras. This is all in Honduras. Then you've got
My
the following summer
work.
when you go back and do thesis work.
Yeah.
What was the thesis work on?
The thesis work was looking at, it was like the baseline evaluation, looking at like violence risk, interpersonal violence risk, and sexual risk with adolescents in a few areas in Honduras with this large nonprofit. They had like a big USA grant, and you can look it up. This project, I think, like contributed to the lowering of rates of violence in Honduras. So it's a super cool project because it was a very innovative, large nonprofit. Unlike the other ones, they were innovative but not large. Nonprofit, big grant. So like it was a more exposure to like big global health work. A more powerful actor. Like they work directly with the Ministry of Health and Education, the embassies. So that was cool. And
what exactly were you doing, like specific on a day-to-day basis?
So I was setting up like all of the designing the research project basically. So working with their DC and regional offices and setting up the actual design of the investigation. And then we were supposed to implement and oversee the research team so then I could use the data. But of course that didn't happen.
Right. So that was more administrative?
Yeah, well, like we would go and do field visits, like make partners, but it was more like the skills, like I had to use skills I learned in my master's. So it was like research design, writing IRBs, like getting approval from the ethics review boards in the US and in Honduras.
Right.
Because you're working with children, so like any research you do with humans, you have to get ethics review. But children, there was a lot of barriers.
Right.
Because we're asking children and adolescents about sexual experiences. So, so
that was your thesis work.
Yeah, that didn't turn into my thesis, but
ultimately leads to your graduation.
Yes.
And then you graduate without a clear plan.
No.
Our friend Sam had graduated and had. All right, sorry, my memory card filled up. But it cut off right when I was saying, so you finish up your thesis in Honduras, your thesis project.
Oh, yeah.
And then the following summer, so now summer 2012.
Yeah.
You've graduated school. You're not sure exactly what you're going to do. Our friend Sam is working now down in Honduras full time as the international development director, like the fundraising director, essentially, of OIA, the organization that we had all worked with. And so you just go down there without a clear plan, but just kind of knowing that, like, I want to continue to work in Honduras specifically in kind of the same field where I had been working throughout college with these various projects. I kind of did an evaluation of staying in D.C., and I had worked for another large nonprofit in D.C., go to New York, or go to Honduras, go elsewhere. And I think all the other abroad projects would have taken a few more months to like go through the selection process and all those things. So I decided not to stay in the States because I felt like I was challenged, and I built so many more skills rapidly in Honduras versus like in a big office in DC. And so I was also like, did not want to do that with my life at that point. And so I went down and I talked to a lot of people who I was like, will this look terrible if like I don't find a job, if I just go down here? And a lot of people are like, well, the worst case scenario is you work on your Spanish, which is helpful for someone, in your career. So I went down, and then, as I said, I think I sent an email, or I just probably sent an email to the director of this large other international nonprofit, and basically like, I'm here, I'm like interested in working, like what can we do? And so at the time he didn't have funding for a full-time position, but we worked at like an internship role, and I got paid a little bit. Had you worked with him prior?
for the thesis work.
Oh, so the same people you were doing same organization as the thesis.
Same organization.
Okay.
And then he later convinced, like he had to get approval from like their DC offices and stuff to hire me once funding opened. Yeah, but it's nice to reflect back on life because I'm like, oh, well, I make some decisions
right.
that aren't very safe at all. But I think I also know, like, what is best for me. Like, a safe decision, I could have stayed in D.C. and worked. Like,
totally.
I could have worked at that same organization. But I knew I didn't want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So, definitely, I don't know if we learned this, we weren't taught a driving force as money.
Totally, you're right.
Or even security, because like I think I've realized as I've grown older that like one of our mom's biggest goals was to have children, and so she did a great job fulfilling that goal, and she did it without fear as well. And so I was like, oh, I guess we've been taught those things. So
yeah, that's why I want to talk to you about some of these things, because I tend to make kind of impulsive
yes.
decisions in what would I think be considered by a lot of people like maybe irrational or risky decisions.
Yeah.
Kind of like what you're saying here, graduating college, not having a clear plan, just deciding, I'm going to move to the most violent country on the planet.
Yeah.
And just look for a job. Yeah. And it's not like there's like
there's
a
not
booming
that many
economic sector in Honduras.
Or like in other countries like sub-Saharan Africa, there's a lot more nonprofits.
Right.
Like there's not really that many foreigners working in.
Right. Honduras is kind of this. Yeah, that's a great point. Honduras is kind of this weird middle zone where obviously it's not like there's not going to be a lot of job opportunities because it's a developing country. Yeah. So just inherently there's not going to be any job opportunities. But then also, in certain developing countries, like you're saying in sub-Saharan Africa, there actually are a lot of job opportunities for nonprofit workers because there's so much foreign aid money and nonprofit money in the country. Yeah. Honduras is kind of this weird middle zone where it's a drastically underdeveloped country and very violent place. But also, there's not that many nonprofits operating there, probably in large part because it is such a violent and unstable place. Yeah. But, you had experience there, and so you decided to go there. Which I don't know, I've done similar things, but I think it's...
Sometimes I look back like I definitely was going through a crisis, or am, I guess, right now, like, maybe I made a terrible decision, because I always forget about the steps that led up to it, like going back to school now, maybe I should have tried longer. Like, I think other people stay in unhappy situations much longer than either of us, so sometimes I'm not sure if that's good or bad, because, bad situations turn good too,
Right, yeah, that's true. You can
but, like, I definitely... try, like, I'm not impulsive. I'm impulsive in a way that everything doesn't have to be guaranteed, but I'm not impulsive in a way that I don't do my research beforehand. So like, I worked hard. If I'm looking back, I talked to many people senior level than me or career advisors, and I weighed the risk and benefits. So
that's probably something I don't do so much of. I'm either gonna, if it's a bad situation that's not working out, I'm quick to pull the plug on it.
Really, like, going back to Emory was the most risky decision, because all the other ones, they didn't have much money to lose. Right. So, like, I think...
So you're saying the decision you made now to go to school is because there's a significant financial investment.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
We'll talk about your work there, because our paths, we'll as we continue the chronology of this story, our paths will soon cross again in Honduras. So you're now down in Honduras. You're now no longer in college. You're now, like, a real, true adult professional with an undergraduate master's degree. And so you're in Honduras. Talk about the work you started doing there with this organization that you kind of cold called.
I continued my thesis work, because at the time they were in the initial planning stage, and I got into the implementation stage. And what happened was that the new hire, program manager, we hit it off really well. She is a very lovely, amazing Honduran woman who had luckily had a ton of experience working for big nonprofits, so she was a good mentor too. But she hired me as to set up their monitoring and evaluation system. Mm-hmm. So it's something that requires a bit more skills than you couldn't hire anyone off the street for that. It would require some sort of education background. And so I worked on that. It was a big project throughout many different cities in the country.
Can you talk about specifically what y'all are doing?
Yeah, so we worked, we were part of a larger community violence prevention project, but it had violence and multiple facets and reasons that the community violence exists. So we are part of like the teen pregnancy prevention piece. So with the Ministry of Education, we created a national sex ed curriculum. So we are in charge of training all the teachers in that. So there was pilot schools that we trained the teachers in that, which was super interesting. And then we also had to work with the Ministry of Health to create youth-friendly centers, health centers. So where they like had youth-friendly hours, like was fun and welcoming, like offered services. But all of it was very eye-opening because we get basically these designs or proposal from DC from people who don't know anything about the logistics of the country
on the
ground, and they want us to implement this like perfect model which you're taught in school, and then like especially because it's so violent, there's all these barriers in place. Like, one, like most of the teachers never had used a condom or knew what they were. Two, like none of the health centers had any medication. So like, how are we supposed to provide youth-friendly services? And then three, the violence to our own educators and staff going into the neighborhoods, like getting kidnapped, being like held up with AK-47s, like schools shutting down because gangs took them over. So,
and this violence that you're talking about specifically right now is perpetrated by
various gangs that started in the U.S. in the 80s, and then when they got in trouble in the U.S. were deported back to Central America. So, different about, I think, mainly 3 or 4 gangs, but I think less or more have popped up. But yeah, I mean, you really see like a total disregard for life there. And you start developing a super high tolerance to violence, and like your expectations change for your own community or what's fine to experience. So it was super interesting in many ways because I had just gone from this like education point, learning the ideal scenarios, to implementing in a very difficult reality that was impossible basically. And then also because this is something wrongly so, like I came in with a master's, which is high education in Honduras, from the US, from a good school, and everyone at 21 turns to me as the expert.
Right.
Which was very overwhelming for me. I think, well, with the insecurity and then with the stress from work too, that's what tired me out to leave Honduras eventually.
Right, it kind of continues the theme of your rapid maturation process. You'd gone from this, it seems like, just to recap kind of what you just said in the last couple of minutes, you'd gone from this conceptual education in the university setting at George Washington University, and now in your first full-time job, you're very much on the ground implementing these programs in a very challenging reality. You're trying to set up a sex education curriculum, and you're educating these educators in the sex education curriculum. You're also trying to set up community health centers for teens where they can get some sort of sexual and reproductive health services. But all the while, in your attempts to do so, both working in these health centers and working in these schools with the sex education programs,
plagued by violence.
It's not, super straightforward to implement these initiatives because you're receiving constant interference, I guess is the most general and benign way to say it, from extremely violent gangs who have no regard for human life, and you're operating in the country with the highest murder rate on the planet, and you're working specifically in San Pedro Sula.
Well, in multiple cities but all this we worked in Tela, San Pedro Sula, Tegus, but all of them were identified by the U.S. government as the most dangerous in the world neighborhoods.
Right. So you're implementing these programs in the most dangerous country, in the most dangerous cities, and then specifically within those cities, you're obviously working in the most at-risk, otherwise known as the most violent neighborhoods.
Yeah.
What type of shit did you see, like specific incidents? I mean, you mentioned like kidnapping and being held at gunpoint.
So we had a few times where we were implementing research project or data collection, and we told the interviewers not to walk around with tablets, but they did, and so then they got kidnapped from a gang. But the police doesn't really exist, so we had to go rescue them. And I saw multiple people got shot right outside my office, which was not a big office building, it was like a little house. We had our team multiple times held up at gunpoint. Every time we go into the neighborhood, we're advised by a gang completely. Every time we go into a school, we had a gang member follow us. Anytime, like, we would have to go to observe data collection, we would be followed. Yeah, so fun little...
So there were some speed bumps along the way.
Speed bumps along the way. Yeah, I had teams break down because Honduran teams no longer felt comfortable going into the areas we were asking them to. But we have this multi-million-dollar grant, so like we either have to like explain it to the donor or implement or push these people to do something that's really dangerous. So a lot of like moral questioning.
How long were you there during this? Like, this is now your final stint in Honduras?
They're a bit over a year.
Yeah. So this is now like 2013
to 2014.
Because I finished up teaching in Arizona in May 2013. Then I ultimately ended up moving down to Honduras as well in the summer of 2013.
Yeah.
And I took a job with Sam.
Yeah.
Working with Oye and then another nonprofit. But Sam and I were working in the town that you had originally kind of set up shop in college, which was El Progreso, which is like 20, 30 minutes outside of San Pedro Sula, which is known as like this, incredibly violent city, the second biggest city in Honduras.
Yeah.
But you, during this time, Sam and I were living in El Progreso, working with this smaller organization, seemed kind of relatively like more like fun and lighthearted, even though it was like kind of serious work with its own, violent obstacles as well. But you were living in San Pedro Sula, and it seems to me, reflecting back on it now, doing like, not to say that me and Sam were totally flippant, and we certainly had our challenges as well, but doing like more hardcore shit and being exposed to...
I guess it was just a bit, we had donors that had a proposal had been written from a farther distance. So, like, when you get money from an organization or from whoever, a government, whatever, you promise them some things. But a lot of times I learned there that it's people who have never been to the country promise those things. Right.
So there's greater pressure. There was greater pressure on in the work that you're doing
because it's millions upon millions of dollars. Yeah.
Sam and I, on the other hand, are working for a small organization on smaller projects, and
it's just more flexible, the money.
Yeah, and we certainly saw some wild shit as well in terms of the unfortunate violence and security situation down there. But we also had some, relatively good time as much as we could without being able to leave your house past sundown.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I would have I actually planned to commute from there, but I was stalked every morning.
Oh, that's right.
So that's why I had to move. So not so safe.
All right. So you worked there until the summer of 2014. Yeah. And then we all kind of packed up.
Yeah,
Honduras.
I should have stayed, and like that's one project where I kind of regret. And the next project I kind of regret leaving early. But I had gotten a job offer from a fellowship to work with the UN, so it was a bit difficult of a scenario to turn down.
And this UN job brings you even further south down to Ecuador.
Yeah.
And we're going to pick that up in a second. We actually have. Serendipitously enough to go hop in the car to go pick up Sam. This has been the aforementioned Sam various times in this interview. I had to go pick him up from the airport, so we'll continue the interview in the car to the airport.
He's on time because I'm thinking.
Probably.
Well, we don't have...
Okay.
We're back.
So, we're back. We're in the car now on the way to the airport to grab Sam. All right, so you wrap things up in Honduras. We all wrap things up in Honduras in 2014, and you head to
Quito, Ecuador. Yeah.
And what were you doing down there?
I was working for the UN agency, the World Food Program, overseeing their food assistance program for Colombian refugees.
Ooh.
In Quito.
Every single one.
We're growing in the car. All right, so sorry, you were working with the UN, the World Food Program.
Yeah.
And you're providing food assistance to Colombian refugees.
Yeah, because most Colombian Ecuador has the largest refugee populations in the Americas. Because since the Colombian crisis has been going on for now 30 years, I guess.
Can you talk about the Colombian crisis for those who specifically aren't aware?
Sure.
Of what's going on?
Sure. So, in the I'm gonna get this wrong, so I'm gonna make it do a big broad stroke.
Broad is great.
Yeah, in the 1980s, all through Latin America, socialist groups had a bit of an uprising, some good, some bad, and a kind of guerrilla group, the FARC. Fuerzas Armadas, something Colombianas. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a Marxist rebel group.
Yeah, a Marxist rebel group began to take stronghold mostly in rural Colombia, but then began taking over a lot of the cities as well. And then they eventually signed a peace deal, probably in the 90s, where part of Colombia is etched out to be controlled under the FARC. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't like a peace deal like, oh, we're disarming everything. It's basically Colombia gave up part of their country to the FARC. So this rebel group still exists, and they go into towns, basically take over. They basically say, okay, this, now your town is ours. Mm-hmm. You either join our army or you're killed. And in the army, they take child soldiers, they take adults, but you're not supposed to form any significant relationship. So your one relationship is to the FARC and to the army.
Gotcha.
So a lot of the refugees came if they had either been leaders against the FARC, or a lot of indigenous groups were fighting against the FARC, or the FARC arrived and they refused. So the FARC will be like, all right, you have a day to get out of this town, mm-hmm. or join our group. Yeah, so most people, I think it was at the time 1,000 people a month crossing the border or something.
From Colombia to Ecuador.
Yeah, well, I probably got that statistic way wrong, so I'll retract it.
So you're working to provide food assistance from the UN to these Colombians who are displaced by the FARC and have flooded over the border into Ecuador. Yeah,
and so we were implementing a new kind of food assistance to make it a bit more dignified. So usually the UN just provides a month's worth of oil, rice and beans, staple foods, and just hands it out. But they were switching, since it had been such an established refugee population in the country, to providing food vouchers, and as well as educational projects on how to stretch your money, but also guarantee nutrition, how to establish life in Ecuador, all of these things. And when leaving Honduras, I had a big interest in refugee populations because, again, I had that dilemma of whether what I was doing was the right thing, if I was the right person to implement it. And I was I became interested in refugees because usually those are the population where the whole world needs to come together to support them, because it's a time of crisis.
Right. So
it's not really, their country, usually something wrong is going on, but it really needs international support.
Right.
So I definitely, Quito was an awesome place to live because it was a normal city. It was a safe country, a big
This is
city.
not San Pedro Sula, Honduras anymore.
There was so much to do, a place to go out, you can meet people, and you could travel around it's an incredible country quite easily, whereas none of that is true in Honduras.
Right. So it's a little change of pace for you, because in Honduras you're living, there's not really granted, there's pockets of Tegucigalpa and San Pedro Sula that are cosmopolitan, or you can have a good time.
Yeah.
But for the most part, the city, the country is pretty torn apart by violence. Pretty much everywhere you go.
Yeah.
And I visited you in Quito during this time when you were working for the UN.
Yeah.
And it seemed like a change of pace, not only because you're not living in this essentially war-torn country.
Yeah.
But also in Honduras, and I worked on a project with you like this as well, and then on my own separate project when I was working with Oye, a lot of our work in Honduras was very like person to person, on the ground, grassroots. We're visiting families in their homes, or traveling, up the mountains to talk to these families, interviewing them specifically. Your work in Quito, from what I understand, with the UN was more administrative, right?
Right, yeah. I mean, it's the UN, so you do a lot more government relations building in coordination, because, like, technically you're supposed to be there to fill a government need.
Right.
Oh, I guess that's all nonprofits, but you're much more working with the government. So I would go to a lot more, like, I did in Honduras more, too, but going to a lot of high-end government meetings. We worked with, like, the UN was also the giver of money then. So, like, I also was overseeing the nonprofit actually implementing the project instead of actually implementing it,
Right.
And then...
You're good.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I was just checking out.
And then... and also at the UN, it's a huge, obviously, organization. So there was a lot less, like, my day-to-day work had a lot less impact.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so just that my day-to-day work had a lot less impact than what we were doing in Honduras.
Gotcha.
But all the same, very interesting. Each of these times, my eyes is open to someone else's reality, especially the Colombian crisis. It's most people would. I remember sitting listening to stories and thinking, like, no one else in the world realizes this is happening. And same way in Honduras too. Like, if you were in that situation, you would hope that. You would think, oh, someone knows that I'm being, like, dragged out of my house, and, like, half of this country is not livable. Or you know what I mean? So it's very, very interesting, but also sent me into another crisis, because I was like, oh, I don't like working for the UN, which maybe I should have just been happy working. Like, that's a great spot to be in when you're 24 or 3 working at the UN, in a nice city, and I had, like, a group of friends, stuff like that. But again, I wasn't happy. Like, I got quite bored there fast at the job. But again, that was just a year of my life. I think if I had more foresight, maybe I should have stayed longer.
And you're saying, did you have some sort of reservations, or, like, what was the crisis there where was the crisis that, like, this is not your first exposure to these working with populations that are in crisis, but your own personal crisis was that, like, holy shit, this issue specifically with these refugees is going on, and, like, I'm one of the few people that's aware of it. Like, no one globally is paying attention. Very
few people globally know what's going on.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's insane to me to, like, be able to comprehend being forced out of my home in that situation, and literally no one really cares, or there's not much action to stop it.
Mm-hmm.
It seems a bit crazy. Like, imagine if in the U.S. someone just came through, like, a whole section of Atlanta and was like, no, all of you need to leave or join our army.
Right.
Like, historically that hasn't gone well in the U.S. They're not happy about that.
So from Ecuador, you then kind of a little bit of a transition, like a little bit of a shift, in the sense that you were no longer, after Ecuador, you were no longer working in, Latin America or in the developing world. So talk about what came next.
Yeah, so in Ecuador, I think, like, if I had been working at the UN more specifically on what my interests were like women's health, sexual and reproductive health, I maybe would have stayed or could have overlooked, but I really felt that I'm always afraid that, like, all of a sudden you turn around and it's like 20 years and you've been working in nutrition, and that was not it's not your interest at all, you know? So I had the need, well, one, I also felt like I had very few connections or ability to work in the U.S. And I think when you're abroad, a lot of times you get homesick, and when you're home, you get a craving for more adventure.
Right.
Like, it's global health work, and I've talked to a lot of colleagues about this. Like, you get this unsatisfaction. Like, you don't know where to be comfortable. Like, you're kind of like a no man. So I think in Ecuador, that was like 2.5 years living abroad, and without much money to go back to the U.S. So I wanted to work in the U.S. So then I moved to headquarters for a U.S. nonprofit, but I worked on a global team. So they had a few projects in Sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America.
Can you just go in specifically, just like describing exactly what you were doing, like what the organization you were working for with? It was like a fellowship type situation.
Yeah,
right?
so it was a fellowship. So I was a fellow of one nonprofit that placed me they placed that like global leaders, like different global nonprofits around the world that maybe didn't have enough money because you run on grants to have this position filled, but like our high impact organization. So
can we go into specific like names of the organization?
Yeah, so I was with Global Health Corps, which is a fellowship, and then I worked at Planned Parenthood Federations of America, but on their global projects. So I didn't work on any of their domestic projects.
So you were a fellow at Global Health Corps, and then Global Health Corps placed you with Planned Parenthood.
Yeah, I mean, you had to interview and all these things, but yeah, we were like shared employees of both.
Got you.
Organizations.
And you were living and working in New York City at the time.
Yeah,
at like Planned Parenthoods. Is that like their
global
international headquarters?
Well, so it's very complicated, but they're a U.S. organization, but since they're so large, they also have global projects. So their domestic headquarters are there.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what were you working? That was a very administrative position, right?
Oh, yeah. But that's like, I guess I wanted, in my mind in Ecuador, that's the experience I wanted, was to like understand like U.S. nonprofit global work. I guess too, I had the question because I really didn't like my day-to-day job at the UN. Like, broadly, I'm glad I worked there. It was nice to work for the UN. It was nice to live in Quito. But I guess I also had the question, again, planning ahead, that I was like, maybe I need to try U.S. work out because you get paid more and it's a more stable life. But I also always had the question, maybe I won't like this work so much. Like, maybe I won't like working at a headquarters. And I mean, I really liked working for the organization, but also it was yet another switch after a year or so working at a place. You had to yet again reintegrate yourself in a team, yet again like rebuild friendships. So I think at the time I was just super tired, and I wasn't like totally in love with the work.
Right.
So,
yeah. What were y'all doing specifically?
So I worked
at Planned Parenthood.
There's a ton of different projects, but my role specifically was again working more on monitoring and evaluation. But like from a headquarters, you support your field offices, so you do like very broad stroke stuff. So like either like doing research for a grant, or like proving that you had some sort of impact during the year, or I don't know, doing like writing up articles and stuff like that. But it's very broad stroke, where I was used to like high pace working in an office, but also going to the field on a weekly basis,
getting your hands dirty,
and also seeing the project, at least like be able to visualize what I was doing.
And the field offices that you were working with from New York were in Sub-Saharan Africa?
And Latin America.
Okay. And what were the initiatives that were going on the ground in Sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America?
A variety of issues. So, like, increasing access to contraceptives, increasing access to a safe abortion, working with different advocacy groups to, like, push these issues, but also service delivery organizations. But we specifically worked with local nonprofits and strengthened their ability to do all of these things.
Okay.
So like we evaluated them, and then we're like, okay, well, here are all your gaps, and this is how we're going to help you fill those gaps so you can do a better job. So, I mean, that's interesting.
Yeah. But from what I understand in talking to you about that experience, and like working in such an administrative role, especially from like, you know, giant nonprofit headquarters in Manhattan, wasn't exactly for you.
No.
And that led you to like one of your most, I don't know, we haven't talked specifically about your next initiative, but talk about the transition to what you did next, because it was very hands-on.
Sure. So, I mean, then I started, like, my crisis of, like, should I go back to school? But, I mean, that's a big commitment to make. Or should I stick it out? So, I really try to, like, but again, this shows you that all my focus from maybe, like, elementary school has been on, like, doing things and not really, like, I think it's interesting to reflect on other people's lives and see, like, oh, probably their priorities were like finding a wife or girlfriend.
Right.
And now I'm realizing, like, oh, I probably should find like more of a balance. But at the time, I was really only focusing on like, what did I want to do with my life? And so I knew I needed to go back abroad. I wasn't really sure how. I wanted to maybe work with refugees again. And so actually a friend through Global Health Corps went to this smaller nonprofit, Swedish nonprofit in Greece, and once the Syrian refugee crisis started, and most refugees landed in Greece or Italy, and there's huge camps being set up, or not really camps, but zones on military base where like they set up tents and like makeshift refugee camps. And so she started there and was leaving. And they had an opening for their maternal and child health nutrition program. As well, at the time, it was like, they said a sexual and reproductive health program. So I interviewed with them and then moved to Greece and worked in a refugee camp, which was super interesting because like in Quito was totally different. All the refugees where I was working got set up in like apartments. And this was like a refugee camp, what you think of, granted in Greece, so probably better conditions than many other refugee camps, but like much tougher working conditions.
Yeah, so describe those, like what is like the structural setup of the camp, and how do people get there, and give us some specifics. Just paint a picture for us of this camp.
Yeah, so we lived in a small city, like an hour outside of Athens, Greece. North on an island there, the second largest island, but the camps, all their camps are in really rural areas, and they're all run by the Greek Air Force. And so most of them were either in like abandoned factories, like just setting up people in abandoned factories, because Greece has a lot of those because of the economic crisis, or mine was on an abandoned military base. And so right when I arrived, they were being transitioned from tents, so like tarp tents, no floor or anything, on dirt, and I arrived in the winter to converted storage containers that no square footage, but would comfortably sleep like one person, and would have anywhere between, like, I would say usually like 5 to the most I think I saw were like 12 in one.
Jesus.
And just like a bunch of bunk beds, and then a bathroom and a sink, and that was it. And so it had heating, and air conditioning was much better, because Greece, although people go there for vacation, is very cold in the winter. But when I arrived, there was no electricity or anything, so it was all day outside in the freezing cold and snow, and like doing. There was also no system in place, because when you're in like an actual emergency, the needs change like month to month. And so a lot of my work there was setting up, like, because the crisis is continuing, setting up a more sustainable program. Because initially the people would go through the camps for 2 weeks, but then would stay in the camps for like 2 weeks and then move on and be resettled somewhere else in Europe. But Europe started closing its borders because so many refugees were there. So people thought they would stay in tents for 2 weeks, ended up staying there for like a year or 2 years. So very different programming is needed for that kind of stuff, because a little city basically started to form. But the craziest thing to me is that, for me, being there was that in the camp, not that people deserve different stuff based on their education or like previous economic status, but you had everywhere from like a Michelin star chef from Syria to like a construction worker in the camp. Like, you had doctors, engineers, lawyers, university professors, and like Syria was a country similar to Turkey, so like maybe just as nice as Greece.
A developed country.
A developed country, yeah. And then you're put in a refugee camp in the middle of nowhere, not next to anything, just in the middle of all these olive fields. And like, no one's telling you anything. You think, oh, 2 weeks, I'll be reunited with my family. Because a lot of people would, even on their journey over, would send their children to Europe beforehand. And so they thinking they're going to be reunited with their 9-year-old in 2 weeks, and that turns out to a month, to 6 months, to a year, and you're just stuck in this refugee camp, nothing to do, and like incredibly hard to get to anything. So I just like with refugees, or even in Honduras, like, it's very hard for me to comprehend having all your power taken away in those situations. And I think, like, I was lucky I got to work with midwives there, and so that was nice because I was trying to decide whether to go back to school or not. And like, there's a lot of gaps. Imagine getting pregnant in that situation, or imagine trying not to get pregnant in that situation and having very like little resources.
Imagine just being in that situation, period.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and you had so many people who are like, Greece had the highest, or the Syrians in Greece had the highest rate of like unaccompanied minors. So imagine being in that situation when you're 16, you think you're reunited with your uncle or dad, and you're there alone, just like stuck in the middle. As a kid. Yeah, basically in a prison. Like, our camp was the only one of the only ones in Greece that was an open camp, so the doors were open. You were supposed to check in, but most times you were like stuck in like a prison, basically. Like, they only allowed like approved visitors in. I mean, which is a double safety net, you know, right. Like, keeps track on people, but also keeps people safe, you know? Right. Our camp had a lot, like, you'll see a lot of, like, I've seen a lot of photos all over the internet in like big press with kids I know, because our organization, or our camp, was like one of the only ones that journalists could come in and take pictures. So a lot of human rights questions, because I remember seeing this little girl's picture, I think on a big international newspaper, and like under it was like investigating like all the child abuse in Greek refugee camps, and like I'm pretty sure their parents didn't know that's how it would be used. Yeah. So I don't know, that was a crazy situation, because I met some of I feel like in all my work I've seen the greatest and worst side of humanity. Like, these people, a lot of times, I mean, I saw them rightfully very depressed and very sad and very frustrated many times, but it's also incredible to see like the resilience of humans. Like, I feel like, one, most of them like would show you, like, you could see the trauma, like when a jet flew overhead, you know, because they're used to bombings, and like, you would see them cringe. You saw like children basically that had been turned into animals from the trauma they had experienced from birth, like young children who had been born into the Syrian war, or whose parents didn't have the adequate skills anymore to take care of them because of the trauma they experienced. So it's just incredible that people keep going, because I saw a lot of incredibly strong families, and then they would tell me like, oh, my whole family was murdered before coming here, or like our town was completely destroyed, because it's a different concept from community violence to war, you know? So
how long were you there?
I was there like 10 months, I think.
And you were working in the refugee camp on a daily basis?
Yeah, until later I became in charge of all of our programs in the refugee camp. So then I moved to like 2 to 3 times a day, but initially, yeah, I was working on a daily basis.
2 to 3 times a week, you mean?
2 or 3 times a week, yeah.
Yeah, talk about how your role changed from when you first got there to where ultimately, like, what role you were playing when you towards.
Well, again, everything changed every 5 seconds, it felt like. So, like, that's why it's weird to say 10 months, because it felt like 5 years. But, sorry, I'm looking to see. Oh, yes.
Sam landed?
Sam landed.
Cool.
Oh, he flew Southwest. Oh.
I'm telling him he has to get a baggage claim.
So
how your role changed?
My role changed. So I was a program manager of a maternal and child nutrition program. But as I was implementing the program, I continued working in and as the camp's like dynamics began to change, I realized with my boss, I was like, I don't think this is like a necessary way to spend the money, because at first when the camps were open, there was a malnutrition risk, but later there wasn't. So also had the pain of having to phase out a program most people enjoy because they got extra food. But I also was able to like evaluate the children's actual nutrition status, and so learned a lot. And so we phased out that program, and then during the time at that time my boss quit, and then I was replaced all very suddenly as his replacement.
You replaced the boss.
Yeah, I replaced my boss. Yeah.
And so then you were in charge of the camp?
Not of the camp. No. The camp is run. All the camps are run by the Greek government, and then like the UN also helps. But our programs in the camp. So we oversaw a child protection program, the food and nutrition, an adolescent safe space, and then a women's space.
Okay.
Yeah. So I oversaw those.
So the Greek government ran the camp, but the nonprofit you were working for implemented certain programs to help facilitate life in the camp.
Exactly.
Initially, you were specifically with the food program, and then when your boss left, you became in charge of all programs.
Yeah. And also had to weed through like a lot of chaos because again, the things aren't implemented the best.
Things don't go quite exactly according to plan in a Syrian refugee camp in Greece. Yeah, so that was interesting. And it also was an interesting learning experience of like, okay, one step at a time, like, because it feels like, okay, maybe you've experienced this in your teaching, like, there's no way I can do this, and it's all, like, I have too many people's jobs and, like, happiness in my hands. Right.
And, like, too much chaos and disorganization. Like, how do I weed through it to make it, like, something more sustainable, organized, and support, like, the people under you? Right. To make sure they can do it. So,
and what, you learn to just take it one day at a time?
Yeah, one step at a time, and you can do it. I guess, like, I realized I never really questioned my ability to do things. I'm thinking about, like, the Honduran thing. But, like, I have a hard time making decisions sometimes. But I think a lot of doing things is just believing you can do it. Maybe that sounds a bit dumb, but
no.
I think we have a much greater ability to do stuff than we think we perceive.
Oh, absolutely.
So, and also I try, although it's more difficult, I try to have that point of view with other people too. So try to do that with the people I managed or the people I work with now. You know, I think you have to have a greater belief in other people's ability as well.
Right. You try to. What are you saying? You're trying to like instill within them this notion of like the human capacity to achieve things far beyond what you think were even possible.
Yeah, and I don't even think you need to do that like as a cheerleader, but I think like if you have the expectation for people, then a lot of times people will, like, if you just have the expectation and don't even talk about stuff, you know, I think people can do a lot more than initially, like, given or initially thought, you know?
Right.
And I've seen that happen, you know?
Absolutely.
I've seen, like, who would have, some of the stuff, especially in the camp, I'm like, who would have thought, like, especially things children went through or stories I heard of how people got to the camp or what they experienced in Syria. I am like, I know people have the ability to do a lot more than they think they can.
Right.
Pause, call Sam and see.
All right, let's pause and call Sam.
Pause.
He was just saying, I'm in Terminal C, and of course that just means he's still in the game. So I told him to go to bed.
Oh, Moo. All right, we have returned.
We're back for a second time.
We've got our Sam. Sam, say hi.
Hello.
We're back home. We left off with refugee camp.
Yeah.
So close that out for us. So you finished up at the refugee camp, and then what was your thinking as you're winding down there?
Well, I guess my thinking the whole time was either to stay, was my decision-making process, a bit frantic decision-making process, I guess, I have done for many times once a year. Are you...
It sounds really low.
How can you tell?
I can see the levels right here.
Hello?
Interesting.
Yeah, same.
Talk now?
Hello?
Huh. Okay. All right. Go. All right. One down refugee camp.
Yeah, and I guess the whole time I was there, I was trying to decide if I could continue working in the field without going back to school, if I really wanted to make the commitment to go back to school, like if the previous skills we discussed about were things I wanted to gain. It's for me the scariest prospect I made or decision I made was to return back to school in a city I didn't really care to live in. Yeah, it's I have a bit flawed thinking sometimes, I think. But for me, that has been one of the most scary decisions. So I was really trying to expose myself to the possible line of work I could go into at the refugee camp as well, to see if it would be something I would want to do, or should I go back to do it. But something I did learn in the refugee camp, because even though those were probably the hardest conditions I've worked in, the most disorganized organization I've worked in, like, I still was so happy to go to work every day because I got to work with people and I got to build, like, meaningful relationships, which may not happen as a provider, but I really enjoyed being able to work with people. And I realized, like, oh no, that's truly what I think I'm best at and, like, what makes me come alive. So that's the decision I made and where we are now.
Well, can you talk about the decision you made and where you are now? So in the refugee camp, you realize, like, okay, I definitely need to be working, like, with people. I can't be working in, like, an administrative position.
Yeah, but I had started that thinking in 2015
in
New York.
Right.
I didn't really, I mean, it's easier to go on with your life than to go back to school. So I wanted to make sure that it was something I wanted to do.
Right.
But I guess what, and we touched on this a bit, again, what I was most afraid of was, like, leaving an established place, like, to move to a place where I didn't have any friends, because I've done this many times in my life. I've also, like, sacrificed building more significant relationships to have all these other experiences. So I think really at that point in Greece, not staying for the work wasn't really that much of an interest to me, but once again making, like, a professional or more self-centered, I think in a good way, decision instead of like moving back to either continuing with my relationship or moving back to a city where I had other friends. So I think that's what's most scary. And still here, the thing I struggled with most, like, should I have done that? Like, will I always make these decisions while be what feels like completely alone, you know?
Right.
But then on the other side, it's nice I haven't lived here since I was like just 18, like just from 17 to 18. Haven't been able to see family this much. So
right. Well, just to recap, I don't know if we've gone specifically into what exactly you're doing.
We did.
We did?
Yeah.
Can you reiterate what you're studying
Sure.
and what you're doing?
I'm getting 2 more degrees. One is a bachelor's in science of nursing, and then I'll get either my master's or doctorate in midwifery.
Okay.
Nurse midwifery, yep.
And you're studying at Emory here in Atlanta.
At Emory, yep.
Cool.
Yep.
What do you want to do going forward?
Good question. So in the next few years, I definitely want to build my clinical skills and hopefully like low income or more underserved areas in the U.S. And then I'm really interested in research still and like combining my public health degree and my midwifery, my clinical skills. So I would be really interested in nursing education and building nursing programs, whether that be in the U.S. or abroad, working with birth attendants and strengthening their skills, because that is one intervention that's been proven to save lives or improve outcomes. Is most women around the world give birth with lay midwives or midwives with no training, and so like strengthening their skills. So right now I'm only focusing on those first few steps,
right?
Actually understanding how to be a midwife, and
right.
Hopefully it can make it a bigger picture.
So your undergrad and graduate work was maternal and child health as well, and then now obviously you're going more clinical with the midwifery and the nurse practitioner. Generally speaking, though, how did you land on, where did the interest in specifically like babies, mothers, maternal health, the birthing process, where did that come from?
I think that's a bit multifold. So I think my mother has always been a huge influence and presence, as we mentioned, in my life. And I think I've been fascinated as her role as a mother and her influence on my outcomes. But then when I went to Honduras and did those initial interviews we talked about, I kept seeing one after one, like, all of these single mothers who were quite young, and that a lot of their hardship or their inability to advance or had a much harder time was because of our societal like fear to talk about sex, which is something so basic, I think. But I think there's all around the country and the world, there's a huge gap between or being able to actually make an informed decision to have a baby when you want to.
Right.
And then I also am like fascinated between women's roles of like the expectation of having to become a mother and like how that changes your role. Because I think there's less of a huge shift for men in most places of like, oh, now you're a father, this is how society looks at you, this is your role in the world, but it is for men. And then more specifically in U.S. with midwifery, I think, it is quite, the birthing and pregnancy process can be dangerous and put you at greater risk. Like, it's also something we've always done, and we've really taken power away from women and medicalized it. Like, you have to be in a bed laying down. Like, it makes it completely unnatural. And I'm not saying like everyone has to have a natural birth, but like, it just takes away any intuition kind of from your role as a woman. Gotcha. But then I'm also very interested in teen pregnancy, pregnancy prevention. So it's not just only pregnancy I'm interested in. Like I go to school with a lot of people who are just like love the pregnant woman and babies, but I love the whole women's health spectrum. Right,
not just necessarily the birthing process, but
the
prevention of the birthing process potentially.
And a lot of a lot of women die. The most dangerous point in your life is giving birth. So that's one of the reasons I became interested in it too. It's like something unique only to women, and a lot of women don't have access to the right way to do it.
Right.
I mean, it seems that silly that it's still the most dangerous thing we do.
Right.
How many births are there each year? Do you think we could get
30?
Yeah, about 30.
You've touched to close out here. I want to touch on two things that we've talked about over the last couple minutes. So motherhood, which you've gone into just now, and then fatherhood, which you touched on briefly. How it's not so much of a commitment necessarily to the transition to fatherhood. All right. So first off, motherhood. Do you want to have kids at some point?
I'm not sure, because as I might have not illustrated, I guess, is that I like to have flexibility in my decision making. Also realize I currently like my life a lot. Like I like the flexibility and ability to do anything at any time. But then I also think I would be a good mother, and I like children. I can see the benefit of that. So it's one thing that I'm like, I have no clue.
Right.
I can see both sides equally.
So you're just not sure yet?
Not sure, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lastly, fatherhood. And this is just a totally out of left field, but I want to get your commentary on it.
Yeah.
Your own father.
Yeah.
And lack of fatherhood on that side. So I went in this extensively with mom.
Yeah.
But really the only other person I can discuss it with that has any sort of, obviously, relation to that situation, which to me is a big deal, like the lack of father in my life.
Yeah.
It's this constant kind of fascination almost with me. But you seem like you've expressed a lot less interest. You seem like just a far more accepting of the fact that we never had our father's involvement in our life, and less interested in either a connection or learning about that side of your family. How do you view the fact that you were that we were raised by this mom who certainly is like the most influential person in our lives and throughout our lives, but there certainly was this lack of fatherly guidance. Our father was never involved in our lives. How do you reflect on that, both during your childhood and then now as an adult?
I think I have a friend that didn't know, like, her mother had her when she was 16. She was the first person to, like, put it into good words, because she doesn't even know who her father is. And she was like, which I think would be, for me, like, more of a missing piece. And there's definitely been times like that. Like, I think I'm a bit more laid back than our mom's side of the family. Like, I like to cook and things like that. I think we probably have, although I think our mom is quite adventurous in her own way too, like, so I think there's some of that missing piece feeling, but I also feel like, because maybe as a woman I was fulfilled enough with our mom's presence, but also it's hard for me to miss what I don't know.
Right.
So, like, everything, if I could miss it or, like, would rack my brain about, is all speculation.
Right.
So that's what's hard. I think I did, and until recent, like, this is terrible, until I've seen male friends be responsible and, like, very caring. I'm lucky to be surrounded by a lot of very good male influence, or seeing male friends have children. I realized, like, oh, men can be equally responsible parents. I didn't see many. I saw dads growing up. I didn't really see that many, like, really influential ones. Whereas I feel like my male friends are much more involved. So I think while I grew up, like, admiring and definitely respecting you, I think it took me until very recently to respect men more.
Okay.
Because we didn't really have the example.
Right.
Which is kind of surprising. And it definitely was through my male friends, and I think I have some very caring and sensitive male friends too. So, like, so I think that's how it's influenced me most. That, like, I probably before was, like, doing a bit stink eye at most. Like, I'm not really, like, I'm just waiting for you to fuck up.
Right.
You know? You know?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
That's an interesting way to look at it. There was never any like was there like a resentment involved in that, or just like a wariness of
probably more weariness, and also I think maybe one, I definitely never wanted to be a single mom or be divorced, which I mean now like I think it's a lot less catastrophe of those things. But,
really, 'cause that's a goal of a lot of people to be a single.
Yeah, and divorce. But no, but it was like a fear, I guess, and so
Gotcha.
not a goal. But what was I gonna say?
Weariness versus resentment.
Weariness. No, I don't think resentment, but I think I was also. It made me second guess my ability to choose like
A partner.
A partner, yeah.
I got you.
You know.
Absolutely.
So.
Well, cool.
Neat.
Well, that's all I got. Do you have any closing comments or thoughts?
No.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you. Godspeed. On your journey.
Thank you so much. I love you, Moo.
Love you too.